don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Dawn Neeson.
Today, Humza Yousaf is expected to be declared as Scotland's new First Minister later this afternoon. A vote at Holyrood will take place before the new leading SNP is formally confirmed as the country's sixth First Minister.
Fascinating. And the Governor of the Bank of England, he's out and about today. He's blaming people retiring early for high interest rates and rising inflation. It's a novel take, isn't it?
I'm actually can I retire now? Is that true? No, I can't. All right, it's day 2 of a high-profile court case into alleged phone tapping by the publisher of the Daily Mail. Yesterday, the Duke of Sussex, that's Harry to you and me, made a surprise appearance at the court as the initial legal arguments were heard. The Associated Papers stringently deny all the allegations against them.
And 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of assault following a protest over asylum seekers in a hotel in Newquay. We'll have the latest from the aftermath ahead of today's final committee meeting on the illegal migration bill.
But most importantly, we want all your thoughts on all of our talking points. We're also doing cream eggs, by the way. So email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk and we'll get into all the top stories for today. But first is your morning news with Tamsin Roberts.
Dawn, thank you, and good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 9:31. Here are the headlines. The Prime Minister will be grilled by senior MPs on post-Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland today. The Liaison Committee will question Rishi Sunak on his Windsor Framework, newly signed with the EU, despite opposition from the DUP and other Tories. He'll also be asked about the economy and tackling small boats in the Channel. Humza Yousaf is set to become Scotland's next First Minister after defeating his rivals to become the new SNP leader. The 37-year-old will become the youngest to win the job and first to come from an ethnic minority background. Mr Yousaf has the backing of the Scottish Greens as well as the SNP. Both parties are set to vote him into power in Holyrood today. If he wins the vote, Mr Yousaf will be sworn in as First Minister, taking over from Nicola Sturgeon. 3 gambling businesses owned by William Hill will pay a settlement totalling £19.2 million for failing to protect customers. The gambling company has been fined for widespread and alarming social responsibility and anti-money laundering failures. The Gambling Commission said the money will be directed towards socially responsible purposes as part of a regulatory settlement. The payment is the largest in the Gambling Commission's history. 3 children and 3 members of staff have died after a shooting at a private Christian school in Tennessee in the United States. Nashville police shot and killed the 28-year-old transgender shooter, identified as Audrey Hale, who was armed with at least 2 semi-automatic rifles and a handgun. The force says the Covenant Elementary School was singled out for the attack, but that the victims were targeted at random. TV, online, radio and tune in. This is GB News. Now it's back to Andrew and Dawn.
Big story today. Humza Yousaf, Scottish, the new SNP First Minister, will be formally sworn in this afternoon. He's going to have a first clash with Rishi Sunak, of course, over the Scottish gender ID legislation, the very stuff that brought down Nicola Sturgeon.
Meanwhile, Labour and the Conservatives now believe they can capitalise on Yousaf's victory, and I think they probably can, can't they? With 20 seats up for grabs in the wake of a damaging leadership contest for the SNP.
Joining us in the studio is our very own, here he is, political editor, Tom Harwood. Tom, he won, but
firstly, thanks for the promotion, but I'm still deputy political editor.
Political editor?
Yeah. No, that's quite all right.
It's a matter of time. Matter of time.
Well, lots of promotions going on in the world of politics, not least in Scotland.
So he won more. I didn't think he was going to win, actually. I thought Kate Forbes was going to win, the finance minister. Effectively, 50% of the party didn't want him.
It's a really, really interesting point because this took multiple rounds of voting. They have a preferential voting system, and in the first round, Humza Yousaf did not get a majority of SNP members. But even more than that, it wasn't even... if we look at all of the sections of voting, you had quite a few SNP members that didn't choose to vote. Indeed, in that first round, Humza Yousaf got fewer votes than the number of SNP voters who sat on their hands and chose not to participate in this contest. So really, we're looking at someone who doesn't have the overwhelming endorsement of his party. However, he does have the overwhelming endorsement of members of the Scottish Parliament, SNP members of the Scottish Parliament, that is, looking at the divisions between the SNP membership and the SNP MSPs, for want of use of alphabet soup of acronyms and initialisms. It does seem he'll have an easier time navigating the Scottish Parliament than perhaps Kate Forbes would have done.
But can I just read this quote from Kate Forbes? You were a Transport Minister and the trains were never on time. When you were Justice Secretary, the police were stretched to breaking point, and now as Health Minister, you've got record high waiting lists. How can you do the job as First Minister if you couldn't do any of those jobs properly?
It is remarkable, and actually we've seen quite a few divisions within the SNP bubble up over the last few weeks and months that hadn't really got an airing before. The last time the SNP had a leadership contest was 2004. So this is the first time that we've had a real contested contest within the SNP. We've seen a fissure grow within this party of perhaps the more socially conservative, a bit older base that used to be the core of the SNP back when they were known as the Tartan Tories. That clearly still exists in the SNP voting coalition, even though it's been obscured by Nicola Sturgeon and what she tried to create as sort of this big nationalist tent. I think Humza Yousaf's going to have a bigger problem trying to hold that coalition together of the socially conservative SNP traditional vote in the Highlands, in the Islands, in the borders, and in and around Aberdeen, for example. These are the areas where, for example, the Scottish Conservatives believe they can make inroads. I was speaking to a number of senior Scottish Conservative figures in recent days who were quite worried about the prospect of Kate Forbes. They think that the media in particular has underestimated the socially conservative base in Scotland and thought that Kate Forbes could really tap into that and broaden that SNP coalition. The fact that the SNP have gone hell for leather for Humza Yousaf and will now be pursuing again the gender recognition reform plans and pursuing that deal with the Green Party that keeps them in power, because of course they don't have a majority in the Scottish Parliament. They have to have this deal with the Greens to govern, and part of that deal with the Greens was pushing ahead with this gender recognition reform and with decarbonisation. That worries a lot of people in and around Aberdeen. The oil industry creates lots and lots of jobs in the northeast of Scotland, and so there are some big problems now with the SNP trying to hold together this coalition that has sustained them for the last 15 years in power in Scotland and may now start to fracture.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because the actual margin was 52 to 48% that voted. So
that's familiar.
We sound like that. We've been here before, haven't we? Should we have another vote on it? What do you reckon? And it was a 70% turnout. So it is very, very, very tight, isn't it?
Very tight. And the 70% turnout is lower than the turnout that they had in 2004, despite the fact that this was an online ballot. In 2004, you had to post off
Yes.
physical letters, and more SNP members chose to vote in that than chose to vote this time. It's a lower turnout than the Tories had in their leadership election, than the Labour Party had in their leadership election.
They just didn't, a lot of them just thought, a plague on all their house, didn't like any of the candidates?
I think a lot of them will have thought that these were flawed candidates. All three of them, Ash Regan as well, a virtually unknown quantity, someone who held a junior ministerial post and resigned. Kate Forbes, obviously, who's kicked off her campaign with a very controversial interview it seemed to contravene the socially liberal stance that the SNP
no sex
had
outside of any marriage.
No, and
let alone same-sex marriage, which she was against.
Absolutely, and that seems to be in contravention of the prevailing attitude of not just the people of Scotland, but England, Wales, and many other parts of the country as well. It is interesting. This does seem to be a sort of B tier of candidates. There's no A-listers, and perhaps the overwhelming personality of Nicola Sturgeon being in post for the best part of the last decade has really suffocated the growth of new voices, of new talent within the SNP. And you get this sometimes in a party when you have sort of one dominating figure. We saw it in the Democratic Party in the United States with Hillary Clinton sort of squeezing out any possible contenders to fight her, and that's why we saw the remarkable and peculiar rise of Bernie Sanders. Yeah. A massive outsider. I think similarly in the way that talent within the SNP have been suffocated by Nicola Sturgeon's overwhelming and domineering leadership, we've seen a limited amount of talent being able to rise.
No succession strategy, was there?
No.
He is very much Nicola's man, though.
Yeah.
I mean, how much is she going to be the power behind the throne? If I was opposing her in any way, I'd be more worried about her being on the backbenches and getting on things behind the scenes and quietly and pulling the strings.
Well, he made a joke, didn't he, that he's going to have Nicola Sturgeon on speed dial. I think that remark he'll regret. It's just as Mrs Thatcher famously said when she went to Tory Central Office, I'll be a backstreet driver.
Yes.
And it haunted John Major. So I think he'll regret saying that.
And we forget, Nicola Sturgeon will, of course, still be a member of the Scottish Parliament. She will be sitting on those backbench seats in the Scottish Parliament. We might well see her pop up every now and again on a Thursday for First Minister's questions. She'll still be a visible presence, and, of course, because she's been such a dominant figure in the landscape of Scottish politics, particularly through the pandemic, it will be very, very hard for Humza Yousaf to establish his own personality, to move on from being this sort of continuity candidate as he's been painted.
Kevin Maguire, Kevin's just arrived. How are you, Kevin?
I'm good. How are you?
A Scottish voice.
Indeed.
Yes.
Very
Come on.
Scottish indeed.
What do you think? What do you make of it?
I mean, I think the problem he's got is the final result was so close, and I think it just confirmed what we'd seen during the campaign. That it's a very divided party. Now,
Were you surprised how close it was?
Not really. I mean, people I'd spoken to over the weekend in SNP and obviously trying to find out who they think is going to win, and they all thought Humza would probably win, but they wouldn't stick their neck out. They thought it would be close.
I thought Kate Forbes might sneak it.
Well, I thought on second preferences, I think if you were looking at the breakdown of the vote, it was so if just a few more of Ash Regan's second preferences had switched to Kate instead of Humza, then she would have won. And he's off to a difficult start straight away because, you know, he has to unite the party first before he can lead the country.
Kevin, how likely do you think that actually is? Because Nicola said, good luck to all the candidates. I'm not backing anyone particular one. I just want them all to work together. But looking at Ash's face in particular yesterday when the result was announced, the third candidate, she didn't look that ecstatic with what was going on.
No, I mean, Humza Yousaf, I think it's fair to say, had all the advantages in the race in terms of he had the party hierarchy, almost the party machine behind him. Nicola Sturgeon obviously couldn't come out and say who she was supporting, but just about everyone else. Her deputy did, the leader at Westminster did, his deputy did. It was obvious who the party hierarchy wanted to win. And Ash Regan, I guess, was a sort of renegade candidate. Probably her next preference would have been Kate. If she couldn't win it, if Ash Regan couldn't win it, she'd rather Kate Forbes won it. I think there was probably areas where they could work together. But, Humza Yousaf did paint himself as the continuity candidate. And Kate Forbes has said since as well, continuity just won't cut it.
And she was pretty rude about him during the debate. We read out the quote about how he was at transport, the trains were late, the health record waiting lists.
Yeah. Justice Secretary, the only one without a law degree in Europe.
Yeah, and so this could all haunt the SNP because it's going to be ammunition for the Tories and Labour.
Absolutely. You'll hear those quotes thrown back at Humza Yousaf between now and the next election, and it's just perfect fodder for the Conservatives and for Labour.
Tom was saying that actually if Kate Forbes had won with her very socially conservative views on marriage and same-sex marriage, that would have been bad for the Tories. Possibly the Tories might gain now as a result of Yousaf. Do you think that's a possibility?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, especially because the Scottish Conservatives have been sustained by the constitutional question in Scotland. You know, they're very tough, pro-union. If Humza Yousaf continues with Nicola Sturgeon's strategy on focusing on independence, then, you know, that plays right into their hands come the next election, because they can say, if you want to stop a second referendum, vote Conservative.
And gender ID, the Tories are opposed to it. Labour are supported it in Scotland, although Keir Starmer is usually, in my view, is on the fence about it down here.
That makes a change.
Funny that. But again, that will be an issue the Tories will play very hard out of.
Absolutely, yeah. And
it's not popular in Scotland, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, that ultimately was probably what brought Nicola Sturgeon down. It wasn't the only thing that brought her down. It was a combination of factors, but that certainly, I think, was the straw that broke the camel's back.
I mean, it's interesting, because that was the first thing he went in on, wasn't it? You know, Section 35, I'm going to take Rishi Sunak on this one. And as you say, Kevin, that was the one thing that actually I think probably was the final straw for Nicola. And it's also, let's talk about things like the monarchy. He's already given very, very strong interviews about that as well. Yeah, absolutely. So ditch the king, basically.
Yeah.
Ditch women.
I mean, it's a strange one, you know. He obviously thinks that Nicola Sturgeon is fantastic. He says he'll still have her on speed dial.
That big mistake saying that.
But she's a divisive figure in Scotland. The people that love her really love her, but the people that don't really dislike her. And if he's going to go down that path as well, then I think he's got real problems.
Talking of divisive figures, today is the end of Jeremy Corbyn's career as a Labour politician, Tom.
Well, it looks set that way. Of course, the vote does not take place until early this afternoon. This is of the Labour Party NEC.
Yeah.
But, of course, Keir Starmer in recent years has built up a majority of supporters on the Labour Party's NEC. And so it looks likely that this motion that, of course, is proposed by him, the Labour Party leader, will pass today. And this will explicitly ban Jeremy Corbyn from standing as a Labour Party candidate at the next election. Interestingly, however, the wording of the motion isn't about the reasons why he was suspended as a Labour MP to start with, which, of course, was over how he dealt with the IHRA's investigation into the Labour Party's anti-Semitism. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, said that anti-Semitism was exaggerated within the Labour Party, and he refused to apologise to the Jewish community for that. This motion makes no mention of that. This motion specifically talks about the electability of the Labour Party, the fact that Jeremy Corbyn led the Labour Party to their worst defeat since 1935, and that in order to win the next election, they need to disassociate themselves from Jeremy Corbyn. A really interesting motion that focuses solely on electability rather than any other issue.
That's interesting, Kevin, because when he ran for the leadership of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, he embraced the 10 major policies of Keir Starmer. Of Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
And now he's denouncing the disassociation.
And
he campaigned for him twice in 2 general elections to be Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing about a leadership campaign, is that you are playing to a different constituency, obviously. He had to appeal to Labour members, most of whom, or at least many of whom, were Jeremy Corbyn supporters, so he had to tell them basically what they wanted to hear. Now, he's ditched every single one of them, and, you know, on Jeremy Corbyn in particular, he's gone very, very hard. And Tom's right, I really noticeable that motion yesterday. It was not about the anti-Semitism and stuff, it was about electability and basically sending out a message to the country that this is no longer Jeremy Corbyn's party, it's under new management, and to try and neutralise Rishi Sunak's attacks, because Rishi Sunak comes back to this again and again at Prime Minister's questions. You campaign for Jeremy Corbyn. So it is a difficult one for Keir Starmer, but I guess this would enable him to turn around and say, well, yeah, I did, but now I've kicked him out of the party.
So do you think Keir Starmer... Sorry.
I'd say, what did you think?
Do you think Keir Starmer's an independent? I mean, that seems to be the
indications that we're getting. Yeah, I don't think a final decision has been made, but he's the type of guy, I think, who won't just go off quietly. You know, he's been the MP for 40 years for Islington
Yes.
North.
Huge majority.
I think the idea that he's just going to slip away and retire to his allotment, I think, is quite far-fetched.
There have, of course, been examples of Labour MPs who have not been reselected to stand for their party in the past, who have then gone on to win as independents. There was an example in Wales in 2001 of this. It was a protest over an all-women's shortlist, and there have been some other examples as well in the past. I think it's not impossible that Jeremy Corbyn could win as an independent Labour candidate in Islington North and presents a challenge to Keir Starmer on the backbenches. But clearly what Starmer wants everyone to be talking about today is the fact that he's being kicked out of the party. Some people are describing this as Keir Starmer's Clause 4 moment. I'm not sure it's quite up to that level, because when we look at what happened in 1994 with Tony Blair winning the leadership and really trying to create what became known as New Labour, a significant move away, Tony Blair had always been known as a moderniser. He'd always been known when he was Shadow Home Secretary. He spoke on. He coined the phrase "tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime." He was known as someone who wanted to move the Labour Party in a certain direction. Whereas when Keir Starmer stood for the leadership, he was saying he wanted to continue the policy agenda of Jeremy Corbyn. He called Jeremy Corbyn his friend. He said that he would rely on Jeremy Corbyn, that Jeremy Corbyn did great things for the Labour Party. As soon as he got in the post, he's pushed him off a cliff. And I think that sort of duplicity might well not work as well for Keir Starmer as the consistency of Tony Blair in 1994 did.
There was that private poll somebody published last week, and one of the attributes people said about Keir Starmer, apart from being boring, was backstabber. So is that a reference to Corbyn?
It's not a great reputation to have. I mean, Ed Miliband had that over his brother. You remember that haunted him all the way to the elections. I mean, I think a lot of people didn't know much about Ed Miliband, but they remember.
But they remember that,
brother.
and there is that amongst, I think, people listening and watching today. There is that sort of like, well, how can I trust someone that could do that to a friend?
Yeah.
But I mean, it is. I mean, obviously, this is politics, and you know what Labour are doing is because they want to win the next election, and they tend to win elections when they are more centrist. So do we think that, you know, Keir Starmer is playing the right game here, the right long game?
I think that certainly this is the view of the people around Keir Starmer, and it is true that there's the famous phrase, if you look at the last, 9 elections or something, you had lose, 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 Blair, 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 lose, lose. Yeah. And there is a lesson to take from that the country isn't that comfortable with going for an incredibly radical socialist programme, and that Middle England is a key constituency to win over, and people do need to feel that they're safe in voting for the Labour Party. However, the issue Keir Starmer has is he has changed his mind on a lot of these issues. He's changed his mind on Brexit, he's changed his mind on immigration, he's changed his mind on nationalisation, he's changed his mind on just about every facet of the Labour Party's manifesto. And so is he the man that people can trust to be consistent when he gets into power? That's a question that the Labour Party will have to answer.
Also, Corbyn still has, doesn't he, a strong constituency in the Labour Party. There's a lot of people on the political left might feel disenfranchised by this, and I could see the Green Party, for instance, benefiting from the Corbyn fallout.
Perhaps, yeah, but I think the first-past-the-post system sort of works against the Greens. They can build up support in various seats, but not enough to actually win the seat, apart from Brighton, obviously.
So is Keir Starmer the right person to take the Labour Party into the next election?
I don't think there's any question about that now.
Oh, his position is secure. It's secure.
I think it's secure, but
it'll be interesting to see if the polls keep narrowing. You know, we're still probably 12 to 18 months out from an election.
And do they
start having a bit of a wobble?
And do they start to panic? Because they panicked quite a lot before.
That's the thing.
Although the Labour Party tends to not get rid of its leaders when it panics.
No.
It's very, very loyal to a fault, whereas the Tory Party, of course, is ruthless.
Off with their head.
But there is an interesting parallel we can draw about what happened in the late 90s. Everyone thought that Neil Kinnock was certain to win 1992, and he didn't, even though he had 20-point leads at one point just after Mrs Thatcher fell. 1992 was, of course, a surprise victory for the boring, technocratic Tory leader. And I wonder if there's a bit of a parallel here. Potentially, the Tory party hopes that there is. It's a narrow path, but a path whereby the boring, technocratic Tory party leader can say that you should stick with the devil you know. And then, potentially, a moderniser within the Labour Party who's been consistent in their views. Someone like Wes Streeting could then take the torch from from Keir Starmer and actually say that this is a more believable path to a modern Labour Party than someone who's flip-flopped on every issue.
It is interesting, Kevin, talking to Tory MPs in the last couple of weeks, the language has changed. They all were convinced it's not how much, if we lose, it's by how much. Is it 97? A massacre. Now they're saying, just as Tom says, is it 92? Is it possible? Could we possibly win again? It's changed.
Yeah.
Because the Prime Minister seems to have got his act together.
Yeah, there's definitely... You get the sense that the wind is in Rishi Sunak's sails at the moment.
Yeah.
He's had a good 2 or 3 weeks now, which, you know...
Quite something for the Tories lately.
Absolutely. If you compare it to this time last year.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's safe to say there is a little bit of anxiety, I think, around in Labour circles, that they think that it's a soft lead. You know, they've had this remarkable lead, really, about 20 points for the last 6 months. But they're not convinced that it is, you know, they're definitely not home and hosed as far as the next election is concerned. A lot of former Conservative voters have switched to don't know rather than switch to Labour.
Yes.
And the worry for Labour is that as we get closer to an election, they decide, actually, we're going to stick with what we know rather than take a chance on a
It's
new Labour
quite
government.
interesting because, I mean, it's sort of like, while there is... The latest poll was like 10 points between the two parties, and that is getting a bit sort of like, you know, bottom-clenchingly tight if you're Labour. But the public don't seem to be that won over. The latest poll, and that was just literally 8 days ago, 33% say the government is doing badly. So it's all to play for.
I think it is, yeah, and you're right. The question is, are we heading for 92-style election, or are we heading for 1997? And it could go either way, really, and that's what makes it so fascinating. The other thing to remember is that, you know, the Conservatives are still a majority of around 70 seats. I mean, that is a substantial hill for Labour to climb. You're looking at almost like a 1997-style swing for Labour, and that's why it's important for Labour to win seats in Scotland as well.
It's division.
Kevin Schofield, the editor of the HuffPost. Tom, you'll probably be back with us later. Coming up, we're going to have more on the new leader of the SNP and how both sides of the board are reacting. More on that in the next hour with you on GB News.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A dry and, in some places, chilly start, but a lot of cloud across the UK. Rain is already arriving into western parts, and that rain will sweep across the rest of the country during the rest of the day. Low pressure increasingly in charge of our weather over the next few days, that low sitting to the west, bringing southwesterly winds. That means mild air, but also moist air, and we're certainly going to see a lot of moisture in the atmosphere during the rest of the day. So by late morning, the rain reaching parts of central and eastern Scotland, falling as snow over the hills for a time before it's just rain, and it's going to be a damp afternoon for the vast majority. A lot of cloud, that cloud sitting on the hills in the west as well, so quite gloomy out there. And it's going to feel cold, I think, especially in the east and northeast, where the cloud comes in after a cold start to the day. But Northern Ireland, the exception. Here, 14 Celsius is possible because the sun's going to break through by the afternoon, albeit with some heavy showers. And those showers will push into western Scotland, parts of northwest England, North Wales, 1 or 2 showers elsewhere as well. But the main area of persistent rains moved through by the early hours of Wednesday. And a lot of cloud remains, I think, as well as a breeze. So it's going to be a frost-free night. Temperatures in most places staying at 8 to 11 Celsius. But it is a cloudy start to Wednesday, and there's more wet weather lining up to come in during the morning. That's going to affect parts of southwest England into Wales, Northern Ireland, as well as northwest England and the Midlands by lunchtime. Further north, some cloud breaks, some sunny spells coming through, and it's going to feel much milder all of a sudden. 15, 16, perhaps even 17 Celsius. We keep that mild air on Thursday, a mixture of sunny spells and heavy showers on Thursday, and then the potential on Friday for some very wet and windy weather, especially in the south.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different.
It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's Welcome to the Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Dawn Neeson.
Hello, that's me. Right, Humzat Yousaf expected to be declared as Scotland's new First Minister later this afternoon, though Holyrood will take place before the new leader of the SNP is formally confirmed as the country's 6th First Minister.
And the Governor of the Bank of England, he's giving evidence right now. He's blaming early retirement, apparently, for high interest rates and rising inflation. No, nothing to do with the government, then.
No.
That will bring you the latest on that throughout the programme.
And meanwhile, it's day 2 of a high-profile court case into alleged phone tapping by the publisher of the Daily Mail. Yesterday, the Duke of Sussex, that's Harry, made a surprise appearance at the court as initial legal arguments were heard. The Associated Papers stringently deny all allegations against them.
And 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of assault following a protest over asylum seekers who were in a hotel in Newquay. We'll get the latest about that. Also, of course, it's the committee stage of the illegal migration bill.
But most importantly, we want to know what you think. So let us know about all of these stories or anything else you want to talk about at emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, let's get you up to date with what's happening around the world with the news with the lovely Tamsin Roberts.
Dawn, thank you. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 10. The Prime Minister will be grilled by senior MPs on post-Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland today. The Liaison Committee will question Rishi Sunak on his Windsor framework, newly signed with the EU, despite opposition from the DUP and other Tories. He'll also be asked about the economy and tackling small boats in the Channel. Humzat Yousaf is set to become Scotland's next First Minister after defeating his rivals to become the new SNP leader. The 37-year-old will become the youngest to win the job and first to come from an ethnic minority background. Mr Yousaf has the backing of the Scottish Greens as well as the SNP. Both parties are set to vote him into power in Holyrood today. If he wins the vote, Mr Yousaf will be sworn in as First Minister, taking over from Nicola Sturgeon. Scottish Shadow Health Secretary Dr Sandesh Culhane doesn't think Mr Yousaf will deliver for the people of Scotland.
He's also somebody who claims to be the first activist, who claims to be somebody who wants independence over everything else. He's not focused on the day job. He's not focused on the things that he should be doing. And he talks up a divisive referendum when really what we need is somebody to concentrate on things like the NHS. So what we are seeing is an SNP party who are split.
3 gambling businesses owned by William Hill will pay a settlement totalling £19.2 million for failing to protect customers. The gambling company has been fined for widespread and alarming social responsibility and anti-money laundering failures. The Gambling Commission said the money will be directed towards socially responsible purposes. The payment is the largest in the Gambling Commission's history. 3 children and 3 members of staff have died after a shooting at a private Christian school in Tennessee in the United States. Nashville police shot and killed the 28-year-old transgender shooter identified as Audrey Hale, who was armed with at least 2 semi-automatic rifles and a handgun. The force says the Covenant Elementary School was singled out for the attack, but that the victims were targeted at random. Belarus says it'll host Russian tactical nuclear weapons following years of pressure from US and NATO allies to change its political direction. The country bordering Ukraine defended its decision to cooperate with Russia by saying its capital has been forced to strengthen its security in the face of rising risk from the West. Minsk says the Russian nuclear plans announced by President Putin over the weekend would not break international nuclear agreements, as Belarus itself would not have control over the weapons. Britain has welcomed the Israeli Prime Minister's delay to his judicial overhaul, which has sparked mass protests. Hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets in Israel in protest of the proposed government reforms. Benjamin Netanyahu announced the delay to the controversial plan to hand over judicial control to the government, Israel's most right-wing ever. The Prime Minister's political rivals claim the plan will weaken the Supreme Court, which has kept a check on the government's use of its power. His proposed legislation would also have protected him from being deemed unfit to rule. Up to 280,000 nurses in England will vote on whether to accept a new pay offer from the government. Members of the Royal College of Nursing have until the 14th of April to vote on the offer, which the RCN has recommended should be accepted. The proposed deal involves a 5% pay rise as well as 2 one-off payments dependent on current salary. It follows a series of strikes since the end of last year in a long-running dispute over pay. Schools and colleges are set to receive £2.5 billion to upgrade their buildings and create extra places. The government says the funding boost will allow thousands of extra primary and secondary school places to be created by September 2026. It's after unions said action must be taken to ensure deteriorating school buildings at risk of collapse are made safe. Prince Harry has said alleged unlawful actions of the Daily Mail publishers made him cut off friends as people came under suspicion for leaking stories to the press. The Duke of Sussex is among a high-profile group, including Sir Elton John, Elizabeth Hurley, launching legal action against associated newspapers. Preliminary hearings at the High Court in London enters day 2 today. The newspaper group denies the allegations, which include recording private phone calls. The price of fresh food is 17% higher than they were a year ago. The British Retail Consortium says the rising price of sugar, coupled with high manufacturing costs, has contributed to price hikes for chocolate, sweets and fizzy drinks. It's as analysis Kantar shows supermarket inflation hit a record 17.5% this month, up from 17.1% in February. That's adding up to £837 a year to bills. This is GB News. More headlines from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Dawn.
Thank you, Tamsin, and welcome back. Now to our top story. Humza Yousaf is on course for a clash with Rishi Sunak over controversial Scottish gender legislation as he prepares to confirm as the new country's First Minister later today.
And Labour and the Tories now think they can actually capitalise on Yousaf's victory with up to 20 seats up for grabs, because whatever you thought of Nicola Sturgeon, she was a formidable vote-winning politician. In joining us for more on this is the political commentator and public affairs consultant Piers Pottinger, who happens to be Scottish. Tell us about Yousaf. Is this a potential win for the Tories and Labour? Because Sturgeon was a very effective campaigner.
She was a very effective politician. He has made it very clear, though, in his winning speech that he's going to continue some of the more delusional SNP policies, including fighting the UK government over the gender law, which seems complete madness.
Allowing 16-year-olds to change their gender without even talking to a doctor.
Absolutely.
15 and a half, they can start deciding.
Yeah. And also, of course, it'll cost millions in court when this comes to a court case.
Yeah.
And the one thing the SNP are very good at is spending money they don't have. The other thing he wants to do is go into Europe, which seems utterly crazy, because if they, on the one hand, want to be independent of Westminster, then they want to go into Europe where they'll have even less independence than they do now. It seems absolutely crazy. But, of course, I think it's a good opportunity for both Labour and, to some extent, the Conservatives. I mean, Douglas Ross does a terrific job.
He's the Tory leader.
He's the Tory leader. But Anas Sarwar, who's a trained dentist, will probably inflict more pain on the SNP.
He's the Labour leader.
He's the Labour leader. And, you know, the SNP have got a huge number of issues. That they're such a delusional party. They focus on this absurd concept of independence, which they couldn't afford in any way, instead of dealing with all the major issues they've got, mostly created by themselves.
I get, obviously, not being Scottish, but I get it's all been about this drive to nationalism when, you know, the highest per capita drugs deaths in Europe, the health problems, the NHS up there, system. They had problems with the police, the transport, and much of this was under Yousaf's watch as well. So, I mean, do ordinary Scottish people think, right, can we just actually start sorting out the mess that's on the ground as well?
Well, that's what one would hope. I think you're getting very close to a point where the Scottish people are going to wake up and say, hang on a minute, this country is in a total mess, and it's all been, the people responsible are the SNP. And also, of course, there's this question of the missing £600,000 under police investigation. And, of course, by having a continuity candidate, as he put himself, Sturgeon is protecting herself and her husband from...
Because he was the chief executive, wasn't he? So
he was. And, of course, the head of the Crown Prosecution Service in Scotland is ludicrously a political appointment and a member of the SNP cabinet.
It is extraordinary.
And she has been stifling the police from action in terms of prosecution for the last 6 months. It is extraordinary, and I mean, any other political party would be in tatters. They are showing signs of breaking up, as it was a vicious leadership campaign. They were very nasty to each other, and in the end, very few people actually voted.
It was only 70% turnout.
70%.
And it was an online ballot, which was fewer than took part in the Tory party leadership contest.
Absolutely, and I think if Ash Regan hadn't stood, Kate Forbes would have won. Now, Kate Forbes seems to me to be a much more reasonable politician and actually taking an interest in the big issues facing Scotland.
She's very pro-business as well, wasn't she?
Absolutely.
She was the finance
Which
secretary.
Sturgeon is totally anti-business. I mean, she's turned against the North Sea oil industry. She's turned against the drinks business, the distilleries. She's turned against everything that you would describe as assets in Scotland. It's madness.
And she's going to sit there brooding in the Scottish Parliament because she continues as a member of the Scottish Parliament. I mean, you just wouldn't want her around, would you?
She'll be pulling the strings.
Yes, she will.
And there's no question that she'll be rubbing her hands with glee because she'll still be the power in the SNP. There's no question of that.
On to Tories quickly. Rishi Sunak, far more popular in Scotland because Boris was a disaster north of the border.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Rishi, I think, has done well in Scotland. Of course, Keir Starmer has been up there every week for the last month, and he recognises the opportunity.
Yeah.
But Rishi, over the last month, has been performing better.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, whereas a month ago I would have said he had no chance of being re-elected, you never know. He might just do it. Mind you, I think he's got to have longer trousers. I think he looks rather silly wandering around in those trousers.
Why doesn't somebody tell him about that? Because he thinks it makes him look taller. It makes him look ridiculous.
But he does wear very expensive shoes, so maybe he's showing his shoes off.
He's got good shoes. Yeah. But on a serious note, he has got... there's no question about Rishi's integrity, his intelligence, but I think it's his gravitas that is lacking. And he still needs to show that he's a tough, strong leader. And with what he's done on Northern Ireland, I think that's something... if he pulls it off, which I think he will.
We're sort of out of time, but you've advised a lot of Tory leaders, Piers. What would be your number one piece of advice to Rishi Sunak to get that stature? How does he grow stature?
I think he has to score points, make single messages and make them land. He's got to be tough, firm, and take the opportunity to speak really forcibly about the key issues we all face today.
Cost of living.
Interesting.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Thank you, Piers. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks.
All right, still to come, we'll have the latest on the ongoing High Court hearing against the Associated Newspapers by Prince Harry. This is To the Point on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
10:17, you're with To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Dawn Neeson.
And right, Prince Harry has just arrived at the Royal High Court ahead of day 2 of the court case into alleged phone tapping by the publisher of the Daily Mail.
Yeah, so for more on this, what we can expect today, Cameron Walker's here, who's our royal reporter. Is he going to... Because this is a 4-day preliminary hearing to see if the whole case can go ahead. Do we think he's going to be there every day?
Well, that's why it was such a surprise that Prince Harry turned up yesterday and again this morning in the last few minutes, because it is only a preliminary hearing.
He can't, he's not giving evidence.
He's not giving evidence. He's not obliged to be there.
Lawyers arguing with each other, isn't it, basically? You've got to be quite bright to understand it.
Yeah, and that's what we originally thought this was going to be over the next 4 days. But Prince Harry yesterday spent all day writing in a little black notebook. Reportedly, he was tutting and shaking his head at the Associated Newspapers lawyers and what they were having to say, defending the Daily Mail newspapers as well. But he wasn't the only one that turned up. Sir Elton John was there as well, Baroness Lawrence, Sadie Frost, because they are collectively suing the Daily Mail publisher over alleged unlawful information gathering.
I work for the Daily Mail, and the company has rejected all the allegations, and so we're going to have 4 days of legal arguments. Harry turning up, as you say, was a surprise. I suspect it was just a bigger surprise, not to us, but to his father and other members of the royal family.
Yeah, indeed. From my understanding, the Prince of Wales and the Princess of Wales are not in Windsor this week. They have taken their children away for the Easter holidays. Of course, they're on Easter holidays. Frogmore Cottage, where we think Prince Harry is staying, he still has a lease on that property for at least another month, lucky for him, is very close to Adelaide Cottage, where the Prince and Princess of Wales live in Windsor. So we asked the question yesterday, well, is there a chance of a reconciliation meeting between the two brothers? Of course, Prince Harry essentially trashed Prince William, his brother, in his memoir Spare.
Flipping family, Cameron.
Yes, yes. Well, we're going to come on to that. Yeah, taking it one at a time, but alleging that William attacked him, etc. So it looks like there's no chance of a reconciliation meeting.
But William and Kate are in Norfolk at the moment, are they, with the children? Because it's Easter half-term.
Yes, exactly.
It's a long way. It's
not exactly out of Mongolia, is it? I mean, it's
There's a train you can get.
Exactly, but the biggest question for me is the King, actually, because he, of course, was meant to be in France for the state visit this week, which, so presumably his diary is free.
Yeah.
And yet still, we are told by Buckingham Palace the King is not in London or Windsor. But again, it's the same argument, isn't it, Andrew?
He'll be in Highgrove in Gloucestershire, preparing to go to Germany. Yes. Look, he doesn't have to pack his own cases, Cameron. He's got staff to do that. So preparing for the trip, he could see his son if he wanted to, and I suspect he doesn't want to see him because Harry was so rude about Camilla. The Queen Consort.
I mean, perhaps, or maybe Prince Harry is saying he's too busy because he's in courts fighting the British tabloids. I mean, that's, I suppose, the argument. But I think it would have been tricky, perhaps, because it is such a surprise that Prince Harry is here in the United Kingdom for the King and Prince of Wales to very quickly adjust their plans, because I'm sure the King would have made some plans, to then go and see their estranged family member. But then, of course, we've got the issue if Prince Harry is saying... can he go to the coronation or not, depending on security? If indeed he is going to have some kind of reconciliation with his family ahead of time. Prince Harry said in the interview on ITV with Tom Bradbury to promote his memoir Spare that the ball is in their court. So are we going to have any kind of communication between the two parties before the coronation?
We're only, 6 weeks away from the coronation now?
Yeah.
So it's getting very, very close.
He hasn't replied to the invitation, has he?
No, well, email correspondence. There hasn't been an official invitation yet.
Amazing.
As far as I'm aware. And the Home Office has asked Prince Harry to give reportedly 28 days' notice to say whether or not he is going to attend, so they can arrange security.
We joke about Harry complaining about the security or lack of security when it suits him. So surely him flying into the UK to attend the trial, he must have notified the palace. So they must have been aware, surely, because you can't just have someone like Prince Harry just popping in.
Or maybe he notified the Home Office.
I feel like it's perhaps more likely he's notified the Home Office because they are the ones responsible for Metropolitan Police protection for VIPs, Royal and VIPs.
His security people would probably talk to those security people.
Yes,
but it just shows, doesn't it, that his security, which he was giving us an argument for why he may not be able to come to the coronation, because he's going to be here for 4 days.
Yeah, and from my understanding, the security team with him yesterday, where he very famously now bumped into a photographer on his way in, was his US security team, so they would not have had firearms, they would not have had access to MI5 intelligence, unlike Metropolitan Police protection, because he only gets that for state occasions. So he was covered, perhaps, we think, during the Queen's funeral, during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, for official travel between the guarded Windsor estate, where Frogmore Cottage is, and Westminster Abbey or Buckingham Palace, for example.
He'll be covered, for heaven's sake, at the coronation. It'll be the most heavily protected event of the year in Britain.
Yeah, and it's not just British heads of state who's going to be there. We've got all the foreign heads of state as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you think he's seeing an opportunity to make money by staying in America and commentating for the American networks on the whole, the pomp and ceremony of the coronation?
It is a possibility. Prince Harry says he needs the money to fund his own police protection, and clearly American broadcasters are prepared to pay a lot of money for Prince Harry perhaps to do that. There are only reports that they have approached Prince Harry to see whether or not he would commentate. I think King Charles would want his son to be at the coronation, and Meghan as well. I think it's more likely that Harry and Meghan will attend the coronation, particularly given the fact that Buckingham Palace have now put on the website that their two children, Prince Archie and Princess Elizabeth, are prince and princess. Perhaps that was some kind of negotiation to see whether or not Harry and Meghan would attend the coronation. So I think relations are better now, perhaps, than they were in January when the book first came out, but they're still pretty poor.
And there's other stuff to come out, surely. There's talk she's doing a book, The Duchess of Sussex.
Yeah, it was a 4-book deal.
And Netflix want more for their millions they're giving Harry, so there'll be more stuff too, which could come after the coronation.
And that is the fear of having Harry and Meghan at the coronation, because these private conversations they would have, presumably, with members of their own family, what's to say in a year's time they're not going to be regurgitated in another Netflix series, another book, and that's the fear for Buckingham Palace.
Because you would be terrified, wouldn't you, of having a conversation if you knew that they were potentially going to turn it into the next book or even another, Our Truth interview.
And will they bring a camera crew with them?
Well, exactly. I mean, they're not. But the camera crew in question is not going to get anywhere near the coronation.
No,
let me assure
but
you.
they could do other stuff.
Well, they could indeed, but it would all be around. It would just be focused on Harry and Meghan, wouldn't it? I doubt other members of the royal family would agree to be filmed by their Netflix crew.
If they are at the coronation, they'll be low profile because they're not working royals, so they will be.
They'll be sitting behind the pillar, won't they?
They will.
Yeah. We saw that at the Jubilee.
Do we know if Harry? I haven't seen it in the footage we've seen today of him going into court. Do we know if he's actually got a camera crew following him for this visit?
We don't know, but that perhaps is a possibility. I don't think any were spotted when he arrived in court yesterday, or indeed when he left. So yesterday he arrived in just a normal London black cab in the front entrance in front of all the media. When he left, it was a side entrance and he was driven away in a blacked-out Land Rover. So I don't think there was perhaps room for a camera crew. But who's to say at Frogmore Cottage he isn't talking about what was said in court. So he's got it in the bank ahead of when this court case finishes.
Well, he's making notes.
Yeah, and he's making notes. What is he making notes for?
He was in a little black notebook.
And the Duchess is in America with the kids, presumably.
Yes, she is indeed. The two kids, of course, on the coronation day is actually Archie's birthday on the 6th of May. So that was perhaps a reason why Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, would not want to be at the coronation. But Meghan, actually, over the last few months, I've noticed, has kept a pretty low profile.
Left it all to him, hasn't
compared
she?
to Prince Harry. Yes, indeed. And we have seen with the popularity ratings, particularly in the United States, who are traditionally more in favour of Harry and Meghan, they're more popular with the American audience, their popularity ratings have dipped. So perhaps Meghan, with her celebrity PR head-on, is thinking, oh, this is not a good look.
It's interesting because the Americans are actually taking the mickey out of them now on satire shows, aren't they?
Right.
So they must be aware that.
I think because, look, people love the Queen in America, and the book is seen as an attack on the institution which he headed, and I think it was always going to be a high-risk strategy for Harry, and I think he's paying the price with his popularity.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw how viral that South Park episode went,
yes.
didn't we?
That was brilliant.
It was hilariously funny.
The fictional Prince and Princess of Canada, although with a remarkable likeness to Harry and Meghan on their worldwide privacy tour. I think it was a satire's dream and comic's dream. stream, and it did go viral. We haven't had any official reaction to that from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, but there were reports perhaps they were seeing if lawyers would sue over that episode. My understanding from speaking to, I know, but from speaking to people within the Sussex camp, that is false.
You roll with the blows.
If they sue a cartoon, they really are in trouble, aren't they?
It's part of being in the public eye. It happens with politicians, happens with all roles.
They want their privacy, Andrew.
You're right.
Keep up.
I know.
Of course.
No,
Maybe they should sue.
They don't invade their privacy, do they?
No. Very, very low profile indeed. Cameron, thank you very much for that update. More to come on that one, obviously. Right, 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of assault following a protest at a hotel housing asylum seekers in Newquay.
Devon and Cornwall police say around 20 protesters and 150 counter-protesters were involved in the demonstration over the weekend. Our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody has the story.
How do you live with yourself? Let the fascists go and you nick someone?
Newquay 2023. The surfers' paradise lost for the time being. Since some 200 migrants moved into the Beresford Hotel on the seafront, it's been a town on guard and divided. Those divisions now getting personal, getting angry, getting violent.
People here, I don't even know who they are, hurling abuse at locals, calling them fascists. Basically, it's caused a lot of unrest in the town, a lot of conflict. It's done a lot. It's not done very well for Newquay. You know, we've got a huge homeless problem in Newquay. We've got a huge homeless problem, and we've got people locals that are, you know, having a hard enough time as it is with the present living day crisis that's going on.
Homeless like this man.
I've been on the streets 20 years, and at the end of the day, like, they've been here 10 minutes or however long it took for them to get over here and then get on the register to be put into accommodation straight away with benefits and a phone and 3 meals a day and fed. And I think, what about the people? What about the servicemen that are out there that, like, fought for our country? What about, like, what about people that haven't got enough money to survive anymore?
The whole debate about where to house refugees, or in fact whether they are refugees at all or whether they're economic migrants, is one that now, for the people of Newquay, is beginning to sound personal. And it ties in with the whole issue of the cost of living. People here are finding life very tough at the moment, and it's getting emotional.
So we all should stick together as part of a team. It's not fair. It causes depression. But the thing is, the police are not helping at the minute with people that are depressed. And I'm suffering with depression myself. Sorry, I might get upset.
It feels too much for some. It feels they're losing their town. Some tell me they're afraid to speak up for fear of being called a fascist. Others tell me Cornwall's a welcoming county. Refugees welcome here, one and all.
If my family had to live like they have to live, I'd get in a boat and risk it. I really would.
In a statement, Newquay's MP Steve Double said what is deeply regrettable is that many of the people from both sides are not Newquay residents and travelled into the area in order to protest. I don't believe these people are reflective of the vast majority of people who live and work in Newquay, who, in my experience, have been incredibly tolerant of the whole situation. The divisions are certainly deep, the wounds raw. The hope is they can heal before the tourist season begins and Newquay can start surfing once more. Jeff Moody, GB News.
Interesting report, quite frightening actually. Yeah. Right, still to come, we'll have the reaction from the public to yesterday's antisocial behaviour action plan. That's after your latest morning news with Tamsin Roberts.
Dawn, thanks very much. It's 10:30. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister will be grilled by senior MPs on post-Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland today. The Liaison Committee will question Rishi Sunak on his Windsor framework, newly signed with the EU, despite opposition from the DUP and other Tories. He'll also be asked about the economy and tackling small boats in the Channel. Humza Yousaf is set to become Scotland's next First Minister after defeating his rivals to become the new SNP leader. The 37-year-old will become the youngest to win the job and first to come from an ethnic minority background. Mr Yousaf has the backing of the Scottish Greens as well as the SNP. Both parties are set to vote him into power in Holyrood today. If he wins the vote, he'll be sworn in as First Minister, taking over from Nicola Sturgeon. 3 gambling businesses owned by William Hill will pay a settlement totalling £19.2 million for failing to protect customers. The gambling company has been fined for widespread and alarming social responsibility and anti-money laundering failures. The Gambling Commission said the money will be directed towards socially responsible purposes. The payment is the largest in the Gambling Commission's history. 3 children and 3 members of staff have died after a shooting at a private Christian school in Tennessee in the United States. Nashville police shot and killed the 28-year-old transgender shooter identified as Audrey Hale, who was armed with at least 2 semi-automatic rifles and a handgun. The force says the Covenant Elementary School was singled out for the attack, but that the victims were targeted at random. TV, online, radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now, back to Andrew and Dawn.
Welcome back. Right, in a few moments we'll be getting stuck into the biggest stories in today's newspapers. We have found some quite fun ones too, by the way, including the latest on the horrific school shooting in Nashville, Tennessee. This is To The Point on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10:36. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Dawn Neeson.
And Britons have been reacting to Rishi Sunak's new zero-tolerance approach to antisocial behaviour, which aims to make sure members of the public can see punishment actually taking place.
Yeah, our South East of England reporter Ray Addison, well, he went off to Eastbourne and Brighton in East Sussex to find out if they think any of it will work or if it's just a bit of a gimmickry.
If you don't have the community with you, you can make any laws you want. They won't work.
Skeptics warn Rishi Sunak's plans to crack down on antisocial behaviour could fail unless parents start taking better responsibility for their children. Dubbed immediate justice, offenders will be forced to clean up their vandalism within 48 hours. However, some say this zero-tolerance approach will fall at the first hurdle if communities don't step up. Ken Ross is a Neighbourhood Watch representative in Eastbourne.
These people don't come outside and suddenly become antisocial yobs. They come from a home that allows it. The community itself has to look inwards and find where these people are coming from. These lads or girls, they don't just happen once they walk out the door. They're there all the time inside the house. And more responsibility should be taken really by the parents.
Last year, nearby Brighton recorded close to 4,500 cases of antisocial behaviour. That's around 20% of all offences. Simon Charlton is the chair of the St Luke's Residents Association. He says when communities do report crime, it's often ignored.
In my particular area, some really lovely buildings have had spray paint put all over them, unpleasant graffiti put up on the walls, and generally it's just not addressed by the councils. Even though we report them rigorously and regularly, we just don't seem to get the follow-up. If you take one of the hot spots for graffiti in my area, there are actually 2 CCTV cameras focused on that area. But ever since I've been chair of the Residents Association for the last 3 years, there have been no prosecutions to my knowledge.
The government's £160 million plan includes new funding for police and crime commissioners to ensure that offenders are punished as soon as possible. Katie Bourne is the PCC for Sussex. She says stopping antisocial behaviour is a top priority.
Once an area starts to get to graffiti, the whole area starts to go down and then your antisocial behaviour increases. It's about prioritising what matters. And local people tell me what matters to them is antisocial behaviour, because that's the offending they see in their everyday lives. And that's the bit that makes them feel less confident and unsafe.
Labour says Conservative cuts to neighbourhood policing have allowed offenders to get away without punishment. Rishi Sunak will be hoping this crackdown will get visible results quickly and increase public confidence that justice is being done. Ray Addison, GB News.
Well, a mixed reaction to that package.
Yeah,
but we were a little sceptical ourselves about how practical it is to make it work. So we'll be talking about a bit more about that. We're going to talk now about the horrific Nashville school shooting. Pleased to be joined in the studio by Joanna Williams. She's Head of Culture, Education and Culture at Policy Exchange. And, of course, the political commentator, Tonya Buxton. Look, how many more times are we going to wake up to this?
It's utterly tragic. Sorry to just say at the beginning, I'm not Head of Education and Culture at Policy Exchange, so I just need to make that absolutely clear in case anybody gets confused.
We'll call you an academic and author.
That's much better. Thank you. But what's important here is obviously the gun attack, the school shooting. Another tragic story, and they come around all too frequently.
This is the 129th mass shooting in America this year.
It's absolutely appalling. And you know, I've got 3 children. If I was a mother in America, I'd be terrified sending my children to school with the prospect of something like this could happen, could become normalised. The problem is when they become so frequent, they all tend to blur into one another. And I think we have to look at what's actually distinctive about this particular case. And I think there are some important points that need to be drawn out for this particular attack. One thing that strikes me as quite significant and quite distinct about this attack is that it was committed by a male who identifies as a woman. This was a transgender shooter.
America. And I think that's quite important to say, because in a lot of the coverage that follows, even in the newspapers this morning, we're hearing about a woman who has committed a shooting, a woman attacker. Now, that's incredibly rare. Obviously, we know that again, tragically, these attacks are occurring all too frequently in the US, but the overwhelming majority of them are committed by men. And I think for us to understand the specific nature of what's going on here, and for us to record accurate statistics, it is important that we discuss a man. This is a man who has been responsible for this crime. This was a male who committed this crime. And when we look at it that way, it fits in much more in line with, tragically, what we've seen before.
When I heard it on the radio this morning, it was shocking to hear it had been carried out by a woman. I thought, what?
Absolutely.
You're right, 'cause that almost never happens.
Exactly. So that's one issue I think is really important. Obviously, the issue that recurs again when we hear about these is about the possibility of more bans and more restrictions on guns.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's something that does need to be considered, but I wonder in the US whether the genie's out of the bottle a little bit. There are so many guns that are in circulation already. How straightforward it would be, what a solution it would be just to implement a ban when there are so many guns seemingly already in the community. And I do think it's always worth bearing in mind, it's a cliched old phrase perhaps, but it is people that kill people, not guns in and of themselves.
Tanya, what do you think?
I think that main thing, what we're talking about, the fact that this is a transgender person, because if you were listening to the news or listening to the radio, as you said, you automatically thought it was a woman. Yeah. And I actually, initially, when they said it was transgender, I thought it was the other way round. Yes. So it wasn't a man to female, it was a female to man, especially because you see them walking with trousers on. I think you're right. It's people, not guns, that kill people. But the laws in America it's just too easy. I can understand it's part of their constitution. It is part of their constitution. But that would be the guns that they're allowed to have, just normal people, are these automatic weapons that kill and kill and kill. Yeah. Bang, 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 bang. Whereas if you had a single gun, I can't believe that I'm sitting here talking about guns, but it does make a difference. It makes a difference between one child being killed and 10 children being killed. If you've got 2 automatic weapons, as this person had, then you kill so many more. And the fact the Americans just kind of shrug it off. A lot of them just shrug it off. Well, it's part of our constitution. We're not going to get rid of that. But you can do finite differences that would reduce the amount of deaths. But the main thing is something's very broken in America for this to be the way that frustrated men take things out on people. But do you imagine we were talking about that we both went to convents, didn't we? Went to schools with nuns, and they were mean. Yeah. It doesn't mean that I'm going to go pick up a gun and do something terrible, but I wonder if this is a religious school, this person being transgender, being quite mixed up and having a lot of resentment, and that's why they went back. Because to go back and kill primary school children it's breathtakingly evil, isn't it?
It is. I mean, with 2 assault rifles, a small gun for protection, if you have to have guns for 2 assault rifles, I mean, it's ridiculous. There is some confusion about whether this person was transitioning from male to female, female to male at the moment. I mean, the police, the shooter was named as Audrey Elizabeth Howe, but uses the pronouns he, him on their LinkedIn site. So, and the police are saying, yes, they were transitioning, but they haven't given us any more details. So we're not entirely sure which way this person was transitioning. But as I said, the real tragedy is there's 3 young children and 3 staff dead, and no one's children should go to school and have their lives put at risk
just
in
looking
this way.
at the photograph on the screen of the killer, look, just chilling. It's just like something like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
But they've found, haven't they? The police have found that it was really calculated. This wasn't some kind of, I woke up, I feel rage, I'm going to go and do something. They planned this. There is a pure evilness about this to categorically plan it to the minute details the way they did.
No, absolutely. And just to come back on what you were saying earlier, Tanya, about the nature of the school, it says here that, the investigators believe the shooting stemmed from some resentment the suspect harboured for having to go to that school as a child. And you're right, evil is obviously the right word to use here, but there's an incredible narcissism as well, where you become so much the centre of your own universe and you think your own feelings are so important that even killing people is kind of justified as an act of revenge because of your own feelings justify that. And that's deeply disturbing. And I think it does raise all kinds of questions about the broader nature of society and how we're raising a generation of young people.
But also politically, we know almost certainly the President of the United States will say, not again, we'll learn from this. When are they going to fix it?
Actually do something. It's all that, I mean, you know that he's going to come out.
In 2020, there were 45,000 gun-related deaths in the United States, of which 19,300 were murders. That's a small town in 1 year.
Yeah, I mean,
for God's sake.
Just reading that it's actually that it is the biggest killer of young children and teens are gun-related deaths.
Do you think it would be obesity or
something?
Car accidents?
Yeah, and no other country comes close. I mean, the United States is way out, followed by Mexico, which is a tiny percentage of this. It's just incredible. And obviously, thankfully, in this country, we had Don Blaine, which was 1996.
And the government legislated and fixed it.
And funnily enough, we don't have guns now.
No.
But it's a big business, isn't it? It's a big business.
Yeah.
And it's a big, you know, like the people that are backing guns pay a lot of money. They lobby like crazy. And I don't know how they sleep at night. You know, we're talking about the nature of people and our ideologies and our souls. How do these people sleep at night?
Yeah, I mean, I heard someone American on the radio this morning saying that our Americans obviously love their guns more than they love their children.
Yeah. I mean, just one other thing I think is worth pointing out here is that, obviously, again, as we've been saying all morning, it's utterly tragic that 3 children and 3 adults have been killed here. But it could have actually been a lot worse.
Yes.
And I think we do have to take our hats off to the police in this instance. They shot and killed the attacker. And as for all I've read on this, it seems like the attacker would not have stopped had they not been killed. And a lot more people could have died. And again, tragically, we've seen other instances of these school shootings where the police have actually held back for one reason or another, have not rushed in to intervene. So I think in this instance, it is worth saying, you know, well done to those police officers. Tragic for the 6 who were killed, but this could have been a whole lot worse.
Mentioning police, it just makes me relieved that we are not arming the police in this country.
Oh, well,
because it's the slippery slope.
And many police don't want to be armed themselves, do they?
Yeah.
Should we move on to something slightly lighter? Gary Lineker.
Oh,
he's in the Daily Mail today. What's Mr. Lineker been up to, ladies?
He's back.
He's saying that he had a verbal agreement that said that he could talk on certain things with Tim Davie, that he'd talk about the refugees and climate change. Those are 2 subjects that he just wouldn't back down on. And I just am one of these people. I'm not into football at the best of times, but what I do feel is that he's a football pundit. He's not doing anything else apart from talking of football. Why? I don't agree with my tax-paying pound being paid to this man, that phenomenal amount of money being paid for this man. I don't agree for any football pundit to get that type of money.
Million, just remind people.
1.3 million pounds. Can you imagine how many young people could go through the BBC and start careers and do stuff with that kind of money? I just don't think he's worth it. I don't care what they say. His gold is not pouring out of his mouth when he speaks. And then on top of that, he is this woke, self-righteous git. Did he actually are the immigrants still staying at his house that he offered to have staying there?
We don't know.
Or was this his annex house that he had? I mean, I am so sickened by this man. I am so fed up of hearing him. I don't want to hear his opinions. He's a footballer. Just talk about football. You already get too much money talking about football and just back out of everything else. But I don't think he should be banned because I believe in freedom of speech. I mean, I can't bear him, but I don't think that anybody should be banned and say what they want.
Why would the General Tim Davie have reached an agreement with this one and not somebody else?
Exactly. And for me, this is the key point here. I mean, I absolutely share your sentiment on Gary Lineker, but in this story, when he's saying, you know, the BBC agreed this deal, I think more fooled the BBC.
Yes.
I mean, how stupid must they be to have agreed this? He's allowed to tweet whatever he likes about refugees and climate change. To me, that says actually more about the BBC than it does about Gary Lineker.
It basically says that
Really,
Gary Lineker's running the BBC.
Yes, exactly. But it also suggests that we talk about institutional racism, institutional sexism. It says to me that the BBC is institutionally woke, that these values are kind of entrenched into that institution. constitution, that they're hostile to alternative viewpoints, and perhaps even more worrying, that they don't see these issues around migration and refugees and around the environment and net zero as even being political issues. No. They just obviously on some level see these as just being kind of common sense issues that everybody agrees on, and everybody right thinking just shares that consensus. Well,
and if you don't,
they don't.
And if you don't, you're either moronic when it comes to climate change, or you're a racist when it comes to the immigrants. Yeah. So I'd like to see if because everyone that works for the BBC is woke, so it's really difficult. But I would have liked to see them tweet something that the BBC doesn't agree with, like, I don't know, during lockdown, for example, questioning lockdown. Then they would have come down on him, but they won't come down on him because it's something that they agree with. Abolish the licence. Exactly.
Would Gary Lineker be allowed to tweet that? Of course not. That's a political statement.
No, absolutely.
It's a political statement.
It really is.
OK, and he also gets paid £1.3 million by a crisp manufacturer.
Yes.
In an obesity crisis.
Yes.
Talking of which, we have a story about food, don't we?
Yes,
this is yours,
we
Tonya,
do. I mean, so they're talking about eating one meal a day, and it's something that Chris Martin had talked about.
The Coldplay Man.
The Coldplay Man with Springsteen. They decided that they're going to eat one meal a day. So I was just saying to Joanna in the green room that I've done all of these diets. So I've done fasting diets for 24 hours, 48 hours. The longest I did was 56 hours, just to be able to write about them, to see what my mood and have my bloods affected on it. Now, for men are quite good on fasting because of the kind of hunter thing. So if you wanted to, as a man, to do that, it would be fine. For women, it does a lot of damage. It stops us from absorbing a lot of nutrients that we need during the day. I mean, time-restricted fasting, doing a restricted fast from, 8 o'clock at night till 9 o'clock in the mornings, that's a 13-hour fast, is really good for you. It makes your body go into autophagy. Autophagy is when your body eats up random cells. There's lots of good stuff for it. But the main point of this is, where is the joy in eating once a day? I can give you all the nutritional facts and anything you need, but ultimately, life is to be lived, and that's, I think, what we've forgotten a lot, is that you've got to seek the joy in life, and the biggest joys in life for me are eating and drinking.
I was going to say, where does wine fit into this? Does that... Just asking for a friend, obviously.
No, I agree completely. For me, dinner is the highlight of my day, and if that's an embarrassing thing to say, well, then I hold my hands up to
I'm just going to need therapy now, because I'm thinking of you as a hunter-gatherer. You're going to go out in your loincloth and hunt food.
I'm going to fast tonight from 8 o'clock till 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to see how I feel.
You'll feel fantastic. You will feel fantastic.
Really?
That kind of fast is just so good for you. You wake up and you're not hungry and you feel energised.
Oh, now I've got hunter-gatherer and frisky.
You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry. Trust me.
The thing with dinner is it's not just about the food, is it? It's a social occasion. It's lovely, I think, to get together with your family, to talk about what you've been up to during the day. And the fact that you do that over food, I think, just makes it this real kind of convivial moment in the day. And to remove that, to just see food as kind of consuming a certain number of calories during a certain time period, just makes your quality of life.
Yeah, I agree. I wonder what they eat in that one meal a day.
Well, they try and kind of fortify it with lots of nutrients. But the main thing is like a lot of these kind of technocrats, a lot of the Silicon Valley boys, they're almost not unhuman or inhumane. They don't have the same kind of feelings. They would take a pill because to eat. So they don't really get the joy of food. And
it'd be something green and slimy. Anyways, we need to move on while you go and hunt down lunch for us.
Yes, exactly.
Big boy. After the break, we'll have all the analysis ahead of Hamza Yousaf's expected appointment. Expected? It's going to happen.
It is.
As Scotland's new First Minister later today. This is To The Point on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the latest weather from the Met Office. A grey and damp day for many of us today. Cold in the east, brighter and a little warmer in the west later on. But essentially we've got low pressure sitting out in the Atlantic, a large area of low pressure, and around this we're going to see a number of weather fronts moving our way over the next few days, including this one. That's arrived following a chilly start across eastern and northeastern parts of the UK, and as the rain sets in, it is going to feel on the cold side. So a grey and damp day for many. The rain on and off, it's not particularly heavy, and there will be some drier interludes. In fact, across Northern Ireland, parts of West Wales and the southwest, some sunshine comes through by the end of the afternoon, and here temperatures will reach 12 to 14 Celsius, but otherwise it's mid to high single figures as those spells of rain move through. A lot of cloud cover. That cloud covering the hills and leading to some mist patches around the coast as well. Shetland staying largely clear until the early hours of Wednesday morning. And we're going to see the rain ease away, a few heavy showers for a time across Northern Ireland before they disappear overnight. And overnight, with the cloud cover, it's going to be frost-free. In fact, a rather mild start to the day, especially towards the southwest, but it's here where we're going to see the next spell of rain moving in. Showery rain for many across the north and the west through the day on Wednesday. Again, a lot of low cloud covering the hills and leading to some fog patches in places. There'll be some heavier rain coming in from the west later on as well. Showers mixed in. So an unsettled day for many, but it is mild. Temperatures up to the mid-teens fairly widely across the UK. And then we've got some heavier rain coming along for Wednesday evening. One area moving up into central parts of the UK, another area affecting Western Scotland and Northern Ireland. And Thursday looks like a very showery day with some heavy downpours mixed in with some sunny spells. Wet and windy, especially in the south on Friday.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories, controversies and issues.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
It's 5 times the opinion, 5 times the debate, and 5 times the fun. The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You could wink at the end. I can't believe I can't Britain's wink. Listening.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Dawn Neeson.
That's me. Holyrood is set for a collision course with Westminster as Humza Yousaf prepares to be announced as the First Minister of Scotland. The new SNP leader has vowed to push on the controversial gender reforms that brought down Nicola Sturgeon, a move which puts him in a legal clash with Westminster. Stay with us for the latest on that.
He's completely mad to be going down that route. Now, Labour's governing body is going to vote on a proposal led by Keir Starmer, the party to which will ban Jeremy Corbyn from standing as a Labour candidate in the next general election. He's been a Labour MP for 40 years. He says he's not going anywhere. Does that mean he's going to fight on? We'll bring you the latest on that.
40 years?
Yeah.
Golly gosh.
Yeah.
Elsewhere, 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of assault following protests and indeed counter-protests over asylum seekers housed in a hotel in Newquay. We'll have all the latest from the aftermath of that one.
And that man, the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, of course, he's back at the High Court in London this morning as preliminary hearings go into a second day involving other celebrities, such as Elton John, against Associated Newspapers over allegations which are denied of breaches of privacy.
But the important thing is that you let us know what you are thinking on any of these stories. So get in touch, email us at gbnews@gbnews.uk. But first, let's get you up to date on the happening news here and around the world with Tamsin Roberts.
Dawn, thank you, and good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 11. The Prime Minister will be grilled by senior MPs on post-Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland today. The Liaison Committee will question Rishi Sunak on his Windsor framework, newly signed with the EU, despite opposition from the DUP and other Tories. He'll also be asked about the economy and tackling small boats in the Channel. Humza Yousaf is set to become Scotland's next First Minister after defeating his rivals to become the new SNP leader. The 37-year-old has the backing of the Scottish Greens as well as the SNP, with both parties set to vote him into power in Holyrood today, replacing Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister. Party critics have said Mr Yousaf has the wrong priorities for Scotland, focusing on independence instead of issues within the NHS and the cost of living crisis. He's also voiced a plan to challenge the gender reforms bill blocked by the UK. Scottish Shadow Health Secretary Dr Sandesh Gulhane doesn't think he'll deliver for the people of Scotland.
He's also somebody who claims to be the first activist, who claims to be somebody who wants independence over everything else. He's not focused on the day job. He's not focused on the things that he should be doing. And he talks up a divisive referendum when really what we need is somebody to concentrate on things like the NHS. So what we are seeing is an SNP party who are split.
3 gambling businesses owned by William Hill will pay a settlement totalling £19.2 million for failing to protect customers. The gambling company has been fined for widespread and alarming social responsibility and anti-money laundering failures. The Gambling Commission said the money will be directed towards socially responsible purposes. The settlement is the largest in the Gambling Commission's history. US President Joe Biden has called on Congress to pass an assault weapons ban after 6 people, including 3 children, were killed in a school shooting in Nashville. Police shot and killed the 28-year-old transgender shooter identified as Audrey Hale, who was armed with at least 2 semi-automatic rifles and a handgun. The force says the Covenant Elementary School was singled out for the attack, but that the victims were targeted at random. Belarus says it'll host Russian tactical nuclear weapons, following years of pressure from US and NATO allies to change its political direction. Ukraine's neighbour defended its decision to cooperate with Russia, saying its capital has been forced to strengthen its security in the face of rising risk from the West. Minsk says the Russian nuclear plans announced by President Putin over the weekend would not break international nuclear agreements, as Belarus itself would not have control over the weapons. Britain has welcomed the Israeli Prime Minister's delay to his judicial overhaul, which has sparked mass demonstrations. Hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets in Israel in protest at the proposed government reforms. Benjamin Netanyahu announced the delay to the controversial plan to hand over judicial control to the government. The Prime Minister's political rivals claim the plan will weaken the Supreme Court, which has kept a check on the government's use of its power. His proposed legislation would also have protected him from being deemed unfit to rule. Schools and colleges are set to receive £2.5 billion to upgrade their buildings and create extra spaces. The government says the funding boost will allow thousands of extra primary and secondary school places to be created by September 2026. It's after unions said action must be taken to ensure deteriorating school buildings at risk of collapse are made safe. The High Court has heard alleged unlawful actions of the Daily Mail publishers forced Prince Harry to cut off his friends. The Duke of Sussex, who arrived in London for day 2 of preliminary hearings, has said he became suspicious of who was leaking stories about him to the press. He's among a high-profile group, including Sir Elton John, Elizabeth Hurley and Sadie Frost, who are launching legal action against associated newspapers. The newspaper group denies the allegations, which include hiring private investigators to record private phone calls. The price of fresh food is 17% higher than they were a year ago. The British Retail Consortium says the rising price of sugar, coupled with high manufacturing costs, has contributed to price hikes for chocolate, sweets and fizzy drinks. Analyst Kantar show supermarket inflation hit a record 17.5% this month, up from 17.1% in February. So that's adding up to £837 a year to bills. This is GB News. More headlines from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Dawn.
Well, in a few hours, Humza Yousaf will be confirmed as the Scottish First Minister, and he's picking a fight immediately with the Westminster government because he's planning to plough on with that ludicrous, in my view, gender ID policy, which allow children to start the process as young as 15 and a half, Dawn?
15 and a half.
To change their gender without even consulting a doctor.
Yes, I know. I do find that quite
And Rishi
frightening.
Sunak, of course, as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has triggered legislation which he can use when he thinks it's something that affects the United Kingdom, because, of course, it will affect the equalities legislation passed by the Parliament in Westminster.
So it's actually illegal at the moment then, isn't it? They can't do it at the moment, but it is the first thing he is doing as the new SNP leader is taking on Westminster.
An absolute gift for the Tories, because Labour support the policy too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a fascinating watch, isn't it? Right, OK. As I said, the 37-year-old's set to be sworn in this afternoon, and he is going to challenge that straight away. That's exactly what brought Nicola down, though, wasn't it, I think? Right, now, joining us for more analysis is the former Labour advisor and political commentator, Kevin Marr. Good morning, Kevin. You're somewhere down the line to us, aren't you? There you are. Good morning, Kevin.
I'm in Sheffield. Good morning to you both.
Good morning. Right, well, what do you make of what's happened in Scotland?
I think it's fairly predictable. I think Humza Yousaf has been pitched from the very, very start as the continuity candidate. He was the favourite of Nicola Sturgeon, of course, and the SNP party machine, of course, run by Nicola Sturgeon's husband. It's a very small gene pool up there. In terms of political organisation, he's been the front runner, I guess, throughout this contest. There's been a lot of noise about Kate Forbes, of course, the finance secretary, particularly her Christian beliefs, which caused a lot of flutter and a lot of noise at the start of this campaign. But I think it's probably always been Humza Yousaf's to lose. Now, he's been around in SNP politics, forever, basically, as a party staffer, as a researcher, kind of classic modern political career trajectory. He's been the transport minister there, he's been the health minister, and he's been the justice secretary as well. So he's been around, but the difficulty for him is that he doesn't necessarily impress in all these roles. There's been a lot of backbiting throughout this campaign, and some of it very publicly done as well by the other candidates about Yousaf's record in government, and what his critics argue is his lack of achievement and lack of judgment. So it's going to be interesting to see how he compares with Sturgeon. I mean, Sturgeon's worst critic would probably concede, she's been a very fluent performer for the last 8 years. Whether or not people would agree with her record or her intentions, that's one thing. But she's a class act politically. So there's a lot for Yousaf to kind of match up to, and we'll find out very quickly whether he's capable of doing that. Now, as you say, his initial foray is to revisit all this issue about the gender recognition legislation and the collision course that he will be on with Westminster in that regard. And in that sense, he is very much the continuity Sturgeon candidate in policy terms. But I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what he does in terms of setting out a direction for a fresh referendum on Scottish independence, because there's no clear pathway for that to happen. So he's got his work cut out there, and it probably seems a little bit like the comfort zone of a Yousaf administration is the kind of gesture politics and pleasing the kind of Greens in government that they're in government with, rather in a sense than trying to sort of sell the SNP's historic mission for independence to the unaligned and the people who are not so far persuaded. There's little indication in this election campaign that we've just seen that any of the candidates, frankly, had much idea in that regard. But I think particularly Yousaf, who was playing to the gallery pretty much throughout.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, Kevin, because, of course, in one of those debates, all three of the candidates said that they would be able to deliver independence within 5 years. Talk about telling a whopper. It's just not plausible, realistic. There's absolutely no prospect of it.
It hums around. This issue of Scottish independence is not going to go away simply because there's so many SNP MPs in Westminster, and simply because the SNP is pretty well dug in up there in Holyrood. Now we'll see with Yousaf whether there's any erosion of that support, and whether the Labour Party gets back in the game, which is a possibility in some places. But I'm not seeing anything necessarily in the polls that suggests there's an SNP meltdown, despite the fact this leadership election has been an absolute shambles for them from start to finish. I mean, they've really aired all their dirty laundry in public in a very kind of damaging way. Now, the question is whether they all take a sort of sigh, a sort of deep breath of look over the precipice and think, look, we very nearly blew it. Let's pull back from that and let's try and coalesce around Yousaf as the new leader. But this being Scottish politics, it does tend to breed long-term animosities, and we'll see how that pans out. So he's going to be tested in the next Westminster election next year. Let's see how the SNP do then, and then the composition of the next Parliament, I think, is going to be absolutely telling about whether the SNP acts as potentially as kingmakers to either a minority Labour government or a minority Conservative government, whether they can leverage their support to get another referendum in the next Parliament, which will be some way on from 2014. So it's kind of all to play for them, but they've shown, throughout this campaign, it's very easy for them to absolutely blow it. And they've not put themselves in a positive light at all. And rather than concentrating on the economy and winning around, the undecided Scottish voters and keeping that support hovering around the 50% mark and growing it, they've kind of just played to the gallery. So the question is whether Yousaf can actually break the habit of a lifetime, put the gesture politics to one side, and actually convince the undecided in Scotland who are yet to back independence.
All right, that's Kevin Marr. Thanks so much for joining us, Political
Yes.
Strategy. This quote is going to be weaponised here. You were Transport Minister and the trains were never on time. When you were Justice Secretary, the police were stretched to breaking point. And now as Health Minister, we've got record high waiting lists. That's of Yousaf by Kate Forbes, the Finance Secretary, who was narrowly beaten by him in the
very
leadership
narrowly.
contest.
It was the result of the referendum the vote was very similar to Brexit, wasn't it?
Yes. Shall we have another vote?
No. Let's not have another vote ever on either of those two things.
No.
But you know what? I just like one political party to not be divided and fight it amongst itself.
Good luck with that. Now, talking of divisions, Labour's governing body is today going to vote on a proposal led by Keir Starmer, who wants to boot Jeremy Corbyn effectively out of the Labour Party and stop him being a Labour candidate at the next general election. Now, remember, Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader from 2015 to 2019 and has been an MP for 40 years.
40 years, and he was backed in 2019 by one Keir Starmer, wasn't he?
And 2017, no, there was two elections.
Yeah, I know. How can we forget?
The Theresa May election.
Elections come along nearly as often as Tory Prime Ministers.
Yes.
Right, OK, so the former Labour leader said that he was not going anywhere, though, didn't he? I mean, I'm 40 years, I'm staying here.
Exactly. So we're going to speak to our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, on what to expect next, because he is outside Labour HQ in Victoria in London. Tom.
Yes, good morning, Andrew. It is an interesting day today because, of course, this has been an estrangement that has been growing for some time between Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party and his direct predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, a member of the Labour Party since the age of 16, a member of Parliament for 40 years, representing Islington North for the Labour Party, and, of course, twice elected as Labour Party leader by the Labour membership. Today faces a motion from his successor in order to boot him out from ever being able to stand as a Labour MP again. But the fascinating thing about this motion that's being presented to the NEC this afternoon is that it doesn't mention on the face of it anti-Semitism. Now, of course, the reason why Jeremy Corbyn is an independent member of Parliament as we speak, the reason why he does not represent the Labour Party in Parliament, is he was suspended of that honour, of that role, due to his denial of the scale of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party following that EHRC report. Jeremy Corbyn said that it had been exaggerated, the scale of anti-Semitism, and he refused to apologise to the Jewish community for those remarks. That's why he was suspended. However, that doesn't appear on the motion today. The motion is all about electability, mentioning how Jeremy Corbyn led the Labour Party to their worst defeat since 1935, and persuading the members of the NEC, where there is a slight pro-Starmer majority, that Jeremy Corbyn should not be re-emitted for electoral reasons rather than any around the issue of anti-Semitism.
Unanimous vote, or will it be hotly contested at the NEC today?
Well, of course, there are those on the NEC who are supporters of Jeremy Corbyn. They, of course, used to hold a majority on that committee, but there are elections for that committee that have seen the Starmer rights, if you will. I'm not sure that that's ever been a phrase, but we'll use it today for want of a better one. They have taken a slight majority around that table, and so it is highly likely that this will pass today. I don't think that Sir Keir Starmer would have put his name on this motion were it not set to pass. But it does expose some fissures within the Labour Party. Of course, we know that there are a huge number of members who backed Jeremy Corbyn, who supported him. There are many members of Parliament, of course, almost all Labour members of Parliament stood on a manifesto in 2019 wanting to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister. It's a remarkable shift to have happened in such a short amount of time, and some may be asking the question, how genuine is this immediate change of heart? Because, after all, the Labour leadership today was saying very different things just a few years ago.
That's Tom Harwood, our Deputy Political Editor outside Labour HQ. Now, there's some breaking news. Nicola Sturgeon has now officially tendered her resignation as First Minister. She was there for over 8 years. She's signed her formal letter of resignation. She's departed the official residence, which is called Bute House. It's very nice, by the way.
I'm sure.
Next stop, Scottish Parliament to vote proudly for Humza Yousaf as Scotland's 6th First Minister. From me, for now, thank you, Scotland, for the privilege.
You know what? It's the "for now" that's inserted in that sentence that sort of like sends me a bit...
So she's not gone completely?
She's not really...
out of public
you
life?
sort of get the impression she's sitting right behind her successor. Yeah.
You did say he's going to keep her on speed dial.
Yeah.
Big mistake.
Indeed. Should we move on? Do a bit of shopping?
I think we should.
Right, OK. Shop inflation hit record highs again this morning, with sugar-based products leading the rise. And pressure is on for the Bank of England governor to get a hold of the UK economy. But Andrew Bailey blames early retirement for high interest rates and rising inflation.
And he's just been joined by senior officials at the Treasury Committee. He's been giving evidence. Now, to discuss it all, is there someone who I think knows a lot more about economics than Andrew Bailey, our very own business and economics editor, Liam Halligan.
That does me no favours.
Yeah. What does he mean it's early retirement causing inflation and high interest rates?
Well, this was there are various Andrew Bailey speeches going on. It's a bit of an Andrew Bailey PR onslaught. Yesterday, he gave a speech at the London School of Economics in which he said that because the workforce has shrunk, because a lot of people between age 50 and 60 haven't returned to work after lockdown, the workforce has shrunk, he said, by about 130,000 people. It's not very much. It's like less than half of 1% of the workforce. But he's saying that's enough to have led to labour shortages, which has pushed up inflation.
Right.
This is part of a trend some people are spotting where Andrew Bailey likes to...
blame everybody else.
Blame a sort of not me gov economics. So last week he was saying, oh, it's all companies' fault that inflation's happening because they keep putting their prices up. But if you're a company and the cost of all your inputs has gone up and you don't put your prices up, then you're going to go bust. Having said that, he has got a point. Some companies have been what we call price gouging, taking advantage of an inflationary environment. And it is true that the labour force is tighter. And what we heard from him this morning was the Treasury Select Committee. This is a cross-party committee of MPs. And in today's intervention, Andrew Bailey was trying to reassure the public specifically, not so much about inflation, we'll come back to that, Dawn, but about the banking crisis. We've seen Silicon Valley Bank collapse in the US. That's the biggest bank failure in America since Lehman Brothers in 2008. And of course, we saw Credit Suisse collapse into the arms of its bigger rival UBS in Switzerland. You know, Credit Suisse, one of the top 30 banks in the world. So let's just have a little listen to Andrew Bailey as he tried to reassure MPs in the Commons this morning, and indeed us, that it's all going to be fine.
I don't think that any of them, and we've said this, that any of these features cause stress in the UK banking system. I don't think we are at all in the place we were in 2007-8. We're in a very different place to then. But we have to be very vigilant. So if I give you the answer, I don't think there's a problem going forwards. I do not want to give you for a moment the idea that we are not very vigilant, because we are. We are in a period of very heightened, frankly, tension and alertness, and we will go on being vigilant.
And Liam, grocery price, food price inflation, pretty grim.
Yeah, he's saying this against the backdrop of inflation. Just on what he said about banking there, Mandy Rice-Davies, he would say that, wouldn't he? He's talking about alertness and vigilance, because a lot of people think Andrew Bailey and the Bank of England, for months and months and months, wouldn't raise interest rates. Too slow. The inflation was over double its target, and they were still saying it's transitory. Don't worry about it. And on inflation, we saw last week, of course, that inflation went up. It went up to 10.4% in February. We thought it was going to come down. And we've had kind of corroboration of that with some private sector numbers. There's a consultancy called Kantar, and they survey particularly the price of food in supermarkets. And we've got some numbers from them out this morning. And Kantar show that in March 2023, so this month that's just ending, food prices were up 17.5% year on year. That's compared to March 2022.
That's a lot.
And that's a lot higher than overall inflation, which was up by 10.4% in February, as I said. Annual food shopping bill for the average family, because of inflation, says Kantar, is £837 more a year. Really sizable chunk. Bang goes your holiday, right? A lot of money. And it's eggs, milk and cheese that are up most sharply. Look, I actually reckon that this February and March food price inflation is a bit of a blip. I do think inflation is going to come down towards the end of the year. I do think Rishi Sunak's going
to come down to 2.9%.
Yeah, I do think it's going to come down at least below 4% from double digits now. But if you think about it, it was in February, March last year that food prices really spiked, because you had that war in Ukraine suddenly coming onto everyone's radar. Suddenly everyone realised, crikey, the Russians and the Ukrainians, they produce a lot of grain, don't they? And who'd have thunk it? Oh, open a history book and you'll have known. So once that food price spike from last year comes out of the numbers, I do think these numbers will come down. But look, this is all about prices not going up as fast as they were. That's what happens when inflation ends. It's not about prices actually falling or going back to where they were this time last year. So this cost of living squeeze will continue.
Liam Halligan.
Yeah.
I told you he knows more than the government.
Well, actually, all us old folk now need to get back to work, obviously pretty urgently, otherwise we won't buy food, will we?
No, exactly. Now, still to come, 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of assault following a protest at a hotel involving refugees in Newquay.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 11:27. You're with Andrew Pearce and Dawn Newsom on GB News. This is To The Point. 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of assault after a protest at a hotel housing asylum seekers in Newquay.
Devon and Cornwall police say around 20 protesters and 150 counter-protesters were involved in the demonstration over the weekend.
Well, let's get more analysis from the former Director General of the UK Border Force, Tony Smith. Tony, morning to you. I appreciate you're not there, but this is pretty unfortunate and pretty unpleasant.
Good morning, Andrew. Yes, well, it is. Of course it is, because, we don't want to see unrest in our communities as a result of migrants being housed in hotels. And as you know, this is a massive problem for the government. We have a very significant number of asylum seekers and refugees housed in hotels across the country. And some people feel that that's not OK. And they want to make a protest about it. And unfortunately, there are elements clearly on both sides of the argument that may be disruptive, that requires a police presence. So I think it just it continues to enforce, Andrew, the need that the government get a grip of the boats crisis, and let's hope that the latest measures they're introducing work towards stopping the boats from coming altogether.
They're also going to try and get people out of these hotels, aren't they, Tony? They're talking about using disused airfields and military bases and ferries. Yeah. That's some of the stuff they've talked about.
Yeah, the thing is, there's 2 different cohorts that people need to understand, I think, who are in the hotels. There's refugees, Andrew, that were invited under the Arab scheme to come here. These were people that are refugees, that have been accepted as refugees, that are welcomed by us, but they're still in hotels. And that can't be right. I think, if we are going to welcome people under safe and legal routes, they need to be properly integrated, don't they, into our communities? Sure. But there are a very large number of people who weren't invited to come here, who came here uninvited in small boats from a range of different nationalities, who are also housed in hotels. So I think what the government needs to do is to clearly distinguish those cohorts, welcome those that are entitled to be here, that have permission to be here, that are legally here, into our communities, do the impact assessments on the communities. But then for the rest of them, there is a very severe problem, isn't there? Because we've got 150,000 people now in an asylum backlog in the Home Office that have yet to be resolved. We're still seeing large numbers coming across in boats. So I think the new illegal migration bill is very relevant here, Andrew, to what's going to happen. And I followed the debate quite closely. I bet you did as well in the House of Commons yesterday. Very broad range of political opinion what we need to do about that. I think there is genuinely a consensus across the House that we need to stop the boats. What's less clear is how we go about doing that. And I think this is going to play out for the government in a very severe, coverage for the next months, all the rest of this year as these policies unfold, to get a grip of the border. Because if we get a grip of the border, I think that, people will be more comfortable. I think people genuinely are more comfortable if routes are safe and legal and people are welcomed here. We've done that with Ukraine, with Hong Kong. But when we see people who are not welcomed here, who are coming illegally, some of them potentially not properly screened, potentially security concerns about, people get rightly concerned that we're not actually controlling this. So I think the real issue for the government is, how do we get control? How do we start to decant people from these hotels, distinguish those that are allowed to stay here and give them status and integrate, and make sure that those that aren't allowed to stay here are removed from the territory? That's the challenge, and it's a very big one for the Home Office.
I say, Tony, you have more experience than most people in this area. So what would if you were in charge of this situation now, what is the first thing you do? What is the answer to this question?
There's no simple answer, Dawn. If there was, it would have been found by now. It's a range of measures. I think the government are doing everything they can. The first thing is to reduce intake of boats. Now, I think we've done quite a lot of work with France. People got different views on that, but we are seeing some evidence the gangs are being disrupted on the French side. The boats are being pushed further south. The Albanians have stopped coming by and large, because we've started returning people to Albania. If we can start getting returns going of other cohorts, potentially to Rwanda, that will send a message to get the intake down. The first thing is get the intake down. The second thing is to deal with those that are already here. And we need to have a plan, a concerted plan, to clear the backlog, settle those that are entitled to stay. And there's a very big impact on communities, how we integrate people into our communities, which we haven't really focused on. So a lot of work to be done, Dawn, on this. It's not no magic bullet, but I think the government are trying their best. They're on the right line, starting with decanting people from hotels, particularly those that are entitled to be here, and integrating them into our communities.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. That's Tony Smith, the former Director of Border Force. Right, still to come, what does Humza Yousaf's appointment as SNP leader mean for women in Scotland? We'll find out after the morning news with Tamsin Roberts.
Dawn, thanks very much. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom at 11:32. The Prime Minister will be grilled by senior MPs on post-Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland later today. The Liaison Committee will question Rishi Sunak on his Windsor Framework, newly signed with the EU despite opposition from the DUP and other Conservatives. He'll be asked about the economy as people continue to deal with the pressure of the rising costs with record high grocery price inflation. The small boats crisis is likely to come up amid a Tory rebellion over the illegal migration bill. Nicola Sturgeon has officially tendered her resignation as Scotland's First Minister to the King and left Bute House for the last time. The vote for her replacement will happen today, with Humza Yousaf, the new leader of the SNP, set to be her successor. The 37-year-old has the backing of the Scottish Greens as well as the SNP, with both parties set to vote him into power in Holyrood today. Party critics have said Mr Yousaf has the wrong priorities for Scotland, focusing on independence instead of issues within the NHS and the cost of living crisis. US President Joe Biden's called on Congress to pass an assault weapons ban after 6 people, including 3 children, were killed in a school shooting in Nashville. Police shot and killed the 28-year-old transgender shooter, identified as Audrey Hale, who was armed with at least 2 semi-automatic rifles and a handgun. The force says the Covenant Elementary School was singled out for the attack, but that the victims were targeted at random. Prince Harry's arrived at the High Court in London for day 2 of preliminary hearings over multiple privacy claims against the publishers of the Daily Mail. He's among a high-profile group, including Sir Elton John, Elizabeth Hurley and Sadie Frost, who are launching legal action against associated newspapers. The court heard yesterday how alleged unlawful actions of the newspaper group forced Prince Harry to cut off his friends. Associated Newspapers denies the allegations, which include hiring private investigators to record private phone calls. TV, online, radio and tune in. This is GB News. Now it's back to Andrew and Dawn.
Still to come, schools are facing further closures from strikes. More flipping strikes as union members are set to reject another paper. I'm so fed up with these strikes. Find out more shortly.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. It's 11:38. You're with To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce, that's him, and Dawn Lisa, that's me, just in case.
They might get confused.
It's very easily done, actually. I mean, yeah, blow your eyes. Right, thank you, Andrew. I mean, not helping today. Right, joining us for another look at today's papers, I'm pleased to be joined by author and academic Joanna Williams. Welcome back. And the lovely political commentator, Tonya Buxton.
Morning.
Who's just made us a really nice cup of tea. Right, OK, we have to start with the serious story of the day, the overnight happening from America, with another mass shooting in another school. I mean, it's where do you even begin with this story? It's
another
just
3 children.
Horrific. 3 children, 3 staff, 28-year-old former pupil at the religious private school, very nice area of town. Obviously, details are still sketchy on what actually happened, but 2 assault rifles.
Incredible.
Why are they?
Why? That's it. Why are they? When are they going to learn?
Yeah.
I mean, how many children and people need to die? Assault rifles are not okay. It's not okay for people to have assault rifles in their homes. I can understand it's part of their constitution that they are allowed to bear arms. Fine, bear arms. Have a gun that takes 6 bullets that goes bang, bang, bang. But assault rifles that can kill, tens of
I think there are more guns in America than people, and the population of America is 330 million.
You're telling me that, and it makes my blood run cold.
It's just so
horrific. It's so frightening.
Yeah.
When are they going to do something about it? I mean, Biden's there. He's in power now, allegedly. So why isn't he doing something? It's all very well coming up going and saying, well, this must change and all this stuff, as you said earlier. When are they actually going to act on it? But they won't, because there's too much money behind it all.
I think one problem is with all those guns in circulation, a simple ban won't remove those guns from circulation. So I think we have to actually look a bit deeper and try and consider what's going on in American culture. What is it about this society that somehow creates the conditions where people are feeling able and wanting.
And this is the 129th mass shooting in America this year. We're not even at the end of March. Semi-automatics are legal still, despite all those shootings.
And they say all the time. They say, we are going to do this, we're going to tackle this problem, and they never do, because, the reason? It's political.
Yeah.
Because if you take on that gun lobby, you are not going to get elected.
But, I mean, even Obama, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, for heaven's sake. Remember?
What for again?
Yeah, quite. After about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But even he, who I think had control of both houses for a while, didn't do anything about it.
So that's why they are shame on them. A shame on someone like Obama, who everybody thinks is like this haloed saint. He had the chance. So this is really because he did have control of both houses. This is on his hands because he had the power to maybe at least start something, but he didn't even start anything.
I do think one problem, though, as well, is that we mustn't take the responsibility off the person, the individual involved in this case. I mean, we can blame guns, and clearly there are too many guns in circulation in the US, but this was an individual, and a horrible thing to say, but if somebody is determined to commit an act like that, either they're going to find a weapon from somewhere, or we've seen horrendous knife attacks, vehicle attacks in the UK and Europe where guns are not as freely available. And I actually think focusing on what is it about individuals that makes them carry out acts like this is the other part of the equation that we need to be thinking of here.
Yeah, I suppose if you grow up in a household where mummy and daddy have guns in the sideboard, I mean, it's just normal.
Nature,
it's just
it?
normal,
It is
isn't it?
normal.
But it's still not normal to go and shoot someone.
No.
It's still not normal to do that. So they're kind of, like I said, I mean, I agree with you, you can use knives or cars or whatever, but if you don't have these semi-automatic weapons, it does minimise the number of people that are going to die if these people are going to carry out these attacks. And I just think that's one step that America could take. You're right, you need to look at society and the people and whatever. But if surely they can get it through the gun lobby to have an amnesty for all these semi-automatic weapons. And then, yes, here's your licence, you can have this one. And so at least it's a small step to reducing the number of kids. I mean, if this person only had a kind of shooting pistol, how many were they killed before the police got in and killed them? It wouldn't have been 6.
Okay, so, I mean, I think we'll all send our thoughts to the families,
Terrible.
of the 3 little 9-year-olds who lost their life by simply going to school. Right, so should we try and lighten this mood a bit? Should we talk about Jerry Hall's frock?
Yes.
Fashion experts.
Not me.
Not me, not me, quite clearly. OK, who selected this story?
I did, because it just made me laugh and made me smile. And it's like, Jerry Hall sticking up her fingers at Murdoch to say, Murdoch who? She's in this advertising campaign for Mugler, and it's the same type of dress that Princess Diana wore when she wore her revenge dress, which was by a Greek designer, which I'd like to shout out, but I can't remember the name now, Sophia something or other. And it's that kind of off-the-shoulder, very hourglass, short black dress.
Yeah.
And she looks amazing. And how old did we say she was, Anne?
66. And, of course, Diana was at the Serpentine Gallery. It was the night it was going to be broadcast on on the Jonathan
Yes,
Dimby programme,
yeah.
that Prince Charles had an adulterous relationship with Camilla. Like, we were surprised by that.
Yeah.
And that was her way of saying, look at what he's turned down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Charles who? And this is what she's done after she's been rejected. And she looks amazing in it. And I just think there's something quite empowering about, you know, everybody thinks that, you know, you're going to sit there crying in the corner, but she didn't.
I think it was that Diana incident that coined that phrase, wasn't it? Revenge dress. And
she knew exactly what she was doing.
She did,
The dress was slightly cut up the leg, wasn't it?
But it's just so wonderful to see an older woman kind of being sexy, empowered and happy in her own skin as well. And I think that's the best form of revenge, just how happy she looks.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess the person I'm thinking of is a woman similar age, Madonna, who has kind of really got to
She's not aged
and
gracefully.
doesn't seem to be sitting comfortably in her own skin. And
somebody else's skin, possibly, but not.
She just looks frightening, doesn't she?
She looks Jeremy Hall any day.
And I loved Madonna because, you know, I'm a child of the 80s, and so I kind of loved growing up with her. And up until about, I don't know, 10 years ago, she just continued to look great. She keeps herself in great shape. But then this face. And then you've got Jerry, who, of course, is still having bits of work done here and there, but done so subtly and so beautifully.
Yes.
And, you know,
it's
I
great.
met her a bit of name dropping. I met her at a party a couple of years ago. She was magnificent. She was funny, charming, tall, beautiful, puffing around in it. So she even made smoking look elegant.
Which is, of course, it's not to be recommended.
And swigging her large glass of whatever she was drinking, and she was incredible.
She likes to party, doesn't she?
Yeah, she did.
No, so
She
good
did.
for her, and doing it for older women everywhere. So go, girls. Not smoking, obviously, that's terribly bad for you. Right, let's move on to something else. Joanna, I think this is your story. This is the sewage pollution story from the Times.
Yes, the water companies have finally admitted that there is a problem with sewage. And what's more, they are saying that they have to take some blame for this as well, which is quite a big thing because it seems that they've really been passing the buck an awful lot in this and blaming farmers and blaming householders.
Always somebody else, isn't it?
But do you know what's really annoying? Because I wish I could be convinced that in accepting some responsibility, it also meant they were going to pay for putting this right. I kind of still suspect that it will be householders who see their water bills.
But they're going to be fined.
They have two, absolutely,
But big fines now. It used to be up to $250,000, and now they're talking up to 25 million.
Exactly,
the bosses millions in bonuses.
The fact is, it's been cheaper to be fined than to
actually
find
sort
another
the
place
problem
to
out.
sort
They've got two jobs: get clean water to us, take the dirty stuff away.
Yeah, and as you said, and the directors who get these fat cat inflated dividends should have them withdrawn.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that's the main thing, isn't it? That, you know, in this country and countries across the world, these big fat cats seem to be rewarded for incompetence.
Yeah.
How does that continue to happen?
And it's more than incompetence. It's almost criminally negligent.
Yes,
it is.
Pushing this stuff into water.
No, and the people who suffer are us, consumers, and actually having water should be a really fundamental thing for people to have access to. Nobody in 2023 should be worrying about being able to afford to pay their water bill, and yet our bills do just creep up, and you have no choice other than to pay it. And we go to the supermarket, you know, we're aware of the cost of food getting more expensive, and you can make choices in that direction. But this is one thing you have absolutely no choice over, and yet we're being penalised for this having become some kind of consumer, some kind of commodity that people are profiting from.
The old days of sharing a bath with your mates.
We could not just take their dividends away, we should make them drink the water they pollute.
Absolutely
Put
brilliant.
that in their kettle.
That reminds me of the Erin Brockovich show when they got all those millions from the company, and they said they brought the water in especially from the town that was being poisoned, and they said we brought it in for you, and they all went
Didn't want to drink it.
Exactly, they're not going to do that.
No, afraid not.
You've thought about that a lot, haven't you? What, to put in their kettles? It's slightly worrying.
It would stop it overnight.
It would.
You did make this tea, didn't you, earlier on?
Not me. Tonya made it.
Actually, very lovely as well, by the way. Right, I think we've got time for one more quick story. Anyone want to select?
Can I talk about King Charles, who's too busy to speak to Harry?
Go on.
I know, we don't, you know, we're fed up of it, but as a parent, I wouldn't be making time for my child that has been so rude for about my partner, so rude about my other children, my other child. I think it's a really good lesson. You know, he's... Oh, gosh, he's such a weak, pathetic man, Harry. I actually feel really sorry for him. I think he's in some kind of, I don't know what's wrong with him.
I don't think
he doesn't look happy.
He doesn't look happy. He looks like he's got some kind of, you know, he's locked in. He looks frightened all the time. He looks angry all the time. That's not the Harry we knew pre him getting married. And I'm not blaming her, but I'm blaming his weakness. But he has been horrible to his father. Yeah. He has been disgusting about his father's wife, and he has been horrible to both his brother and his sister-in-law. Why would they make time to see him?
Yeah.
Don't you think they should rise above it, though? Be the bigger man.
No, I think what Harry's done, I mean, to add to everything that Tonya said, that I completely agree with, you know, he's breached trust.
Yeah,
this is the problem. I mean, if I was Charles and arranged the meeting, you'd be thinking at the back of your mind, is he bringing a camera crew with him?
Is he taping it?
Exactly. Or will this come out in volume 3 of the biography?
Yeah, because remember, he's told us there's enough for 2 more editions.
Exactly.
And his wife's writing a book.
Totally. And when that trust is undermined in a family relationship like that, it's a really difficult thing to have to piece back together. And, you know, it'd be nice perhaps to think that they can patch it up.
I don't know that they can.
I don't think that. I think there's too much water under that bridge.
I think there's too much hurt. There's too much damage.
It's a public feud. It's such a public feud. And he's doing it to monetise his fat cat life in the United States. How many bathrooms has that house got? 9? Do they really need 9 bathrooms?
But they want their privacy.
Imagine their water bill.
Andrew, they want their privacy.
Yeah, they do.
Don't forget.
I still find it absolutely astonishing how we've gone from the Queen, who didn't put a foot wrong, never complained, never explained, to this, actually... The royal family make the crown look quite tame. I mean, it's it's just like Shameless in a palace.
No, I mean, what the Queen had was a real stoicism, and I think that's what we all respected her for. Exactly as you say, they never complain, never explain. But she kind of was just this solid figure in all our lives. And yet you've got this new generation, Harry at the forefront, Harry and Meghan at the forefront, of kind of just public emoting. There's nothing there that they're not prepared to share. You know, I know so many details about Harry's life that I just wish I did not know.
And the Queen was the soul of discretion.
Exactly.
Well, the only thing we knew is that we know she loved horse racing. We don't know which Prime Minister she liked the most. Harold Wilson always said it was him, but we don't know. We didn't know her political views.
And we liked it like that.
We did like that.
And now they're all writing books, and we've got Prince Andrew possibly writing a book.
It's the stoicism that's missing, and also the hard work that's missing. Because, you know, having met... I remember meeting... You know, you were name-dropping earlier, but when I met Prince Charles at the palace, I saw how hard he worked, you know, shaking people's hand, knowing a little detail about each person he spoke to. It's exhausting doing that. It's exhausting. It's hard work, and the Queen did it 2 engagements a day, as King Charles does now. It's exhausting, and these youngsters don't want to take on that exhaustingness, and Harry in particular only wants the glamour, not the actual hard work.
I spent a day following, when I was on the Telegraph, or maybe the Times, I spent a day following Charles in Wales. My God.
Hard work.
He talked to hundreds of people, we covered hundreds of miles, and he talked to everybody. Except me, I might add. But he talked to everybody. And I must say, I was knocked out by the application and the energy.
I'm going to trump you because I think there's somebody in that family that works harder than the King, and that is his sister.
Princess Anne.
I spent a day with her. I was absolutely exhausted.
And I bet you she definitely didn't talk to you.
We had a nice chat, actually. We had a lot in common, I'll have you know.
Right. She didn't talk to you.
No, she didn't talk to him.
No,
fair enough.
But she's prided herself on that, not talking to the press. That's her way. And look at her 2 kids who've done very well with her because she never gave them royal titles. Very normal. Sarah Phillips and Peter Phillips. But, I mean, Harry, you know, the soap opera will go on right up until the coronation.
If you were Harry and Meghan's children, would you want that royal title? Would you like to be Prince?
No.
I was going to say Prince Andrew, that's a bit unfortunate, isn't it?
I mean, they're too young to have any kind of say in this, aren't they? But the fact that the parents have made this public display of wanting privacy, of leaving the royal family, of criticising the royal family, and then foisting these titles upon their own children before they're old enough to have any say in it. You know, it's kind of marketing your own children, isn't it? They're setting their children up as a brand.
Even in the name they gave her, Lilibet, what was that about?
Oh, my gosh.
Outrageous.
My gosh. We've come to the end of our show. It's flown by again, Andrew.
Yes.
Thank you so much
Sonia
for having me
Buxton's
on.
been lovely. Joanna Williams, been lovely having you.
Yes, absolutely. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhouse. This is To The Point with Andrew and Dawn. And Bev will be back in the chair tomorrow. See you at 9:30. Thank you for watching. Bye.
Bye.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the latest weather from the Met Office. A grey and damp day for many of us today. Cold in the east, brighter and a little warmer in the west later on. But essentially we've got low pressure sitting out in the Atlantic, a large area of low pressure, and around this we're going to see a number of weather fronts moving our way over the next few days, including this one. That's arrived following a chilly start across eastern and northeastern parts of the UK, and as the rain sets in, it is going to feel on the cold side. So a grey and damp day for many. The rain on and off, it's not particularly heavy, and there will be some drier interludes. In fact, across Northern Ireland, parts of West Wales and the southwest, some sunshine comes through by the end of the afternoon, and here temperatures will reach 12 to 14 Celsius, but otherwise it's mid to high single figures as those spells of rain move through. A lot of cloud cover, that cloud covering the hills and leading to some mist patches around the coast as well. Shetland staying largely clear until the early hours of Wednesday morning. And we're going to see the rain ease away, a few heavy showers for a time across Northern Ireland before they disappear overnight. And overnight, with the cloud cover, it's going to be frost-free. In fact, a rather mild start to the day, especially towards the southwest, but it's here where we're going to see the next spell of rain moving in. Showery rain for many across the north and the west through the day on Wednesday. Again, a lot of low cloud covering the hills and leading to some fog patches in places. There'll be some heavier rain coming in from the west later on as well. Showers mixed in. So an unsettled day for many, but it is mild. Temperatures up to the mid-teens fairly widely across the UK. And then we've got some heavier rain coming along for Wednesday evening. One area moving up into central parts of the UK, another area affecting Western Scotland and Northern Ireland. And Thursday looks like a very showery day with some heavy downpours mixed in with some sunny spells. Wet and windy, especially in the south on Friday.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is